Good evening and welcome. Well, good evening from my side, at least. If you're over in America, it's not good evening at all. But here in Scotland, good evening and welcome to our funky stream where we are going to be mapping parts of Kalegen, a city in the Empire, part of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay's primary setting. And this evening, we've got quite a lot to potentially do. Last stream, we almost finished the inside wall section of the city. For those of you who know that what we've been building so far, you'll know what that means. I will bring it up, though, for everybody else. Here we go. This is where we've reached so far. I will just zoom in a little. Now, for all of you out there who've been watching the streams, you know that I'm going to be going down onto my screen over here where I've got it on the screen. You can see it being drawn there. And me over here on this side. So I'm going to be heads up, heads down, which means that I'm not going to be paying attention to all the comments as they come in. However, I will bring up all comments on screen as we make our way through the map. The way that we do our streams is that I draw whatever it is that you suggest. I discuss out all of the suggestions that you make. For those of you who've been in the previous streams, you'll know that we've had all manner of awesomeness added to this map so far. All of the cool that we discuss out gets gathered together, hopefully by Yalib and the rest of the community. I hope Yalib's out there somewhere. And that then gets transferred over to later World Anvil. We're going to be building a huge set of articles to describe the entirety of this city. Now, Kalegen is a city that's in the core Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 rulebook. You'll find it sitting inside the map that I made in there called the Glorious Reikland map. And it's the homelands to House Hallskrug, one of the most important houses in the Reikland. House Hallskrug has previously had emperors come from it. And currently, the High Lord Ambassador of the Reikland is from House Hallskrug. And he's the chap who organizes this piece of land and has been working very hard at building up this city of late. Right, so I'm going to quickly run through our quick hellos from everyone. A quick hi from Yalib. Great to see that you're out there. Who also says that he's currently dashing home, so may miss the first few minutes. I'm looking forward to seeing you when you arrive. Alexander, great to see you here. Good evening. Thanks very much for chiming in, and hopefully you'll have lots of fun comments for the bits that we're adding on. Mark Allen, hello Mark, great to see you there. The bloke person is also here. Hiya everyone, and hiya in return. And finally, Nico, hello Nico, great to see you. Hello. Right, as you can see, we can bring up the comments on screen as we progress through with the map. And a quick hello there from Martin as well. Hi Martin. That's how we'll bring up comments for that you'll have, hopefully providing suggestions for what we're doing next. Now, we've got a couple of options for where we go on map next, but I'm pretty sure we're going to dive into finishing off this little bit here, which you can see currently has a big word shipbuilding scribbled upon it. Let me just bring up a little bit more of the screen there. This entire area is set aside for shipbuilding, mostly smaller ships, merchant ships, and a small amount of, if you know your Empire ships, small amount of ships of the line from the Empire, in particular, their war galleys moving up to maybe their third-rate vessels. So you'll be looking at smaller wolf ships and similar. So I'm going to remove the shipbuilding comment that's sitting there. We've got ourselves one, as in this one, two, this one, three big towers. And it was suggested last week, I believe, by Martin, that we use the Tower of, is it the Tower of Belém? I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it. The Tower of Belém as a suggestion for how that could appear. Now, as I recall, the Tower of Belém is in Lisbon. Go check it up yourself. It's a pretty cool big tower that sits just out into the water, into the bay, and has a large area around the side of it, where you could, I presume, place cannons and various other dignitaries could land upon and take a look at it. So I think that using the Tower of Belém as a base point is not a bad idea. So we've got, as I said, one, two, three of those to cover. There is also a further tower that's going to be on the end of that one. And I think if they all follow the same model, designed by the same architect to do largely the same job, that makes sense. And in terms of its core building, I imagine it, as I've said multiple times in some of the previous streams, this is the 8th stream now. In our previous streams, I imagine they were built almost using the old Roman style for how they built out into the water and then built out separate towers out there. Go check it out because it's quite a fascinating way of building. So I'm going to probably rub out the little bit that I've already drawn on this tower to give it a shape that's a little bit similar to the Tower of Belém, but not necessarily the same. Most certainly a tower with a landing area in the front, and we can fill that up with cannons and mortars and various other heavy weapons that the Empire could use to throw out shots in defense against any potential attack. And given that we've definitely got ourselves an area that's across the water from a largely forested, largely wild section of all places, I think it's Middenland over there because it's part of Karaburg, the Princedom of Karaburg, that is. We've got ourselves a host of potential dangers that could come out of the waters and make their way across, ranging from the expected, our trolls, greenskins, to potentially the unexpected. When civil issues potentially arise, let's say if you happen to be playing the enemy within, and we could have attacks coming across the water from that direction too, assuming, of course, that the Hallskrugs aren't actually going to be allying with the people that are potentially against the Emperor, depending on how you run your version of the enemy within. So I'm going to dive into these. We have ourselves a couple of areas here that we're going to need to paint out, and if you've got suggestions for them, I would very much welcome them. I'll quickly go through what's left inside the walls, and then we'll just dive into painting it, and you can throw up your suggestions. So we have ourselves our 1, 2, 3 cannon emplacements used defensively, but primarily, for all they are a defensive fortification, they are primarily going to be an ostentatious display of wealth rather than being properly defensive. The Hallskrugs are very interested in entertaining and impressing any individual dignitaries that are arriving. So we're going to be looking for those three to look pretty damn impressive. Beyond that, though, we've got ourselves an open area of dock here, an open area of dockland here, another part of dockland here, and you might notice a small gap there for another dock there. I'll loosely describe what they're for, and if you've got any ideas for special locations that we could add to those, or perhaps ways that these towers each manifest individually, we could turn those into special locations if you want. Our map has loosely got 2 types of location marked on it. Our brown buildings, like these ones over here, which are just buildings that match the general tone of the area that we're building, and then purple buildings. Purple buildings are locations that we're purposefully building up. If you bought Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay expansions, like say the Altdorf and Middenheim books, or if you bought the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set, you'll get the idea of the map having a bunch of numbered locations, and each numbered location is given a little bit of extra detail where they describe exactly what it looks like, the people who might live there, whatever cunning plots and plans can be used by the GM to bring those into the story. And we're going to be doing the same over in World Anvil for all of those locations. So every single purple location is somewhere a bit special, a bit different, and it's going to get some extra detailing to it. And if you've got any ideas for purple locations specifically for this area, they'd be most welcome. So loosely, what we're going to be drawing today is this area, which currently doesn't have much described for it. This area here is a landing point for visiting dignitaries. So we want to make sure that anything that we add here is suitably impressive, at least to look at from the outside. And if it's not, we need to make sure that we build some sort of barrier. Like, for example, perhaps a wall sits over this section here in an attempt to block that, the sight off towards anything that might be less salubrious to our visiting ambassador who comes in from that side. And makes their way up the boulevard all the way along here as he puts on a big white brush. Okay, that's how they're going to make their way up to eventually, as we make our way over here, the palace, which is here, and some truly upper-class bits and pieces that are up there. We also have this area here, which is where most of the trading vessels are going to be coming in. They're going to be docking around these areas here, which suggests that we, might require another a place to dock here. Our vessels are going to be offloading here, which means we're going to, and having goods, passed by stevedores and teamsters down further into the city. Some of them are going to be coming right in the smaller barges and docking in here too. But I think we're going to need to make sure that we've got a method of getting across here and here. In the previous stream, there was a suggestion of effectively a boat bridge here. A bunch of boats sitting side by side on top of each other that are used as a temporary bridge to get over this section, with perhaps a more permanent bridge over on this side, high arched, or alternatively, possibly a bridge with that lifts up so that the barges can get through without having to take their masts down. So possibly a bridge there as well, because we need to make sure that we can get people over. Importantly as well, out here, there's going to be a casino of all things, somewhere that people can gamble at and spend all their money. And the reason that it's over that small gap here is effectively for tax reasons. This section here is going to be inside Middenland, where the gambling rules are much more lax than this side, which is on the Reikland, where the gambling rules are far tighter because of the Sigma Right influence and the fear of, let's say, attracting the dark gods, in particular Zinch, the god of fate. Obviously, the Ranaldins have got a lot to say against that in particular. But over here, where things are far more lax, we're going to have ourselves some sort of floating casino. I'm not really too keen to go on to a big boat-style casino that would be the same as, say, something you'd expect to find over in the States. But something along those ideas. If anyone's got any ideas for how that could manifest, do drop it over. We've had some discussions for potential characters that could be found on the periphery between the two. Importantly, the land, pardon me, the gap there between the Reikland and Middenland, and it is defined there. So yeah, we've had some discussion about that in previous streams, but we haven't really decided anything that could be out here in our large flat area where we're going to be taking in a lot of trade goods, and we're going to need to make sure that we've got a method of getting those goods elsewhere down through the city if possible. So if you've got any ideas for anything we can put in those areas, now is the time to drop them in as comments. If you need to take a little bit of time to figure out exactly where that's going to be, do so. If not, just throw it in the comments and we'll bring it up. So far, we've only had one comment, which is, probably two comments. Don't forget the Midland Pier and Casino. I haven't. We'll pop that over at the end there. And Martin also suggests there was also talk of a barge bridge between the two parts of the shipbuilding area. Yes, there was. So we're going to make sure that we drop that in. So I'm going to start just diving straight in because this evening, I'm not going to be staying on for for a very long time, although I said that last time and ended up almost far longer than I intended. But there are things that are happening in my household that I need to keep track of. So I'm not going to be staying on for a huge time tonight. So I'm very keen to just dive in and get mapping as fast as I can. So I'm going to start over here and take a look at this loose area that we've got for the rather large pier area and figure out how we're going to get there. Now, we need to make sure that we've got a route across here. So we're going to build ourselves our temporary bridge, which needs to be at least wide enough to take a coach and high enough to take a coach. So that's going to be going through there. The edge of our pier here as well. It's not really a pier per se, is it? And then moving out to this, which I may thin down for our final version of it and drop it down to about that size. So if anyone's got any ideas for stuff we could put out there, please do put them in the comments. If not, which is sometimes the case, I'll just start filling this up with stuff that I think makes sense for the area. Now, as we've discussed in previous streams, we're not going to be having any locations for Manan beyond a shrine in these areas. And I think somewhere around here, a shrine would make sense, largely because Manan is the god of the sea, not the god of rivers. There are far more gods of the rivers than there is on Manan's side. And I'm keen to keep that distinction clear. Having said that, though, they are going to be doing shipbuilding, and many of these ships are going to be making their ways down to the sea through Marienburg. So I think it's important that we have at least a shrine marked somewhere to add that detail into place. So I will quickly get back to my lines one. We're going to want down the length of this some building work, because as we all know, the Empire loves to stack its buildings on stilts out over water, and then maybe a secondary small jetty. Now, if you consider how this port's relatively small, so the offloading area, which I imagine is probably going to be here-ish for many of them, and here, they're going to need to have a method of storing it, probably in this area, which is why we've got a large flat area sitting in the middle here. So we're going to need warehouses, I presume, in there. We're also going to need some offices for the people who are managing them and handling them. Perhaps there's going to be at least one maybe tavern rather than inn out here. So if you can think of a feature tavern or inn that we could potentially add to that, that might be quite good. I'm going to widen out this section as well a little bitty, so that we can get some larger ships making their way into the main area. I'll need to drop a little bit more color on for the water there, which I shall do now. Let me just quickly fill that up. Oh, wrong color. A bit too purple. Go down there. How about that? It's still the wrong color. It's a bit too bright. Let's go about there-ish. That'll do for the moment. It's not quite pale and blue enough. It's because I've got my colors on just now. It makes it harder to see. I'll fix that later, though. Okay, so we've got ourselves a bit of the old river there. That's definitely the wrong color, but I'll figure it out in a second. Right, back to our lines. So we're going to need, we need some form of inn or location in there. That could be a focal point, possibly some offices. That could be a focal point, possibly a shrine of some sort. That could be a focal point. If you've got any ideas for anything else that could go in there, as I say, do drop them in as comments. Once I've finished out just doing the basic lining for this section, I'll go take a check in the comments. So if there's any new ideas in there, I'll incorporate those as well. Okay, so we need our clear gap here for when we do our lines. And we've got our pier coming out from there as well, freestanding by itself. And we're going to need our casino in there doing whatever it is that we decide to do with our casino too. And potentially other buildings for staff for that, or alternatively, possibly something else. If you can think of anything else that might be best put out there. Okay, so let me just quickly get rid of that excess road there. Okay, we've got ourselves somewhat of a shape building now. I will get rid of the lines on these so we can take a quick check at what it all looks like so far. Okay, basic shape now in place. Do we want to have any additional piers or jetties or wharves sticking out of here? I think at least one here makes sense. So I'm going to pop that out now and drop on our lines. Our lines are currently a bit too thick, actually. I need to thin those down. I'll sort those out as I tidy up elsewhere. So add ourselves a quick extra jetty on the end here. Make sure it matches the rest. Okay. And I'll tidy up these as we go. Right, so let's see if there's any extra ideas for those. I shall run through what we have. First up was there. Is that correct? Yes, it is. On the island, we probably want some warehouses. I agree. I think that's a good idea. Open yards as well, some sort of port tax authority. Yeah, I think somewhere definitely for them at least to go. The actual port and the ports and taxes will be try to figure out what the best building to represent that as one. But loosely, I agree completely. So we'll make sure that we definitely have those. Wasn't the Harbour Master's customs check on the other side? Yes, there is one already over on the other side. It's sitting right here. It's as that's one of the main areas for moving goods. Yeah, I still think some sort of offices over here make sense. We have the main one for the other side, but there could probably be a secondary one here as well. Yes, there probably could be. Martin continues, some large over-designed cranes along the pier, wheeled winches and capstans. Yeah, something like that would be a good idea too. The bloke person then suggests, I've seen people talk a lot about halflings and gnomes, but what about Kalegen's dwarves? Could we have a dwarven tavern with sneaky links to Barrack Var? Barrack Var is really far away from here. That would be a little bit like having an Edinburgh port having sneaky links through to, I don't know. I mean, it's that far away. In terms of real world distance, sneaky links to South Africa, it's that far away. The Warhammer world being much larger then, okay, that's a bit too far, given how big Africa is. Regardless, the Warhammer world being much larger, maybe Ivory Coast, than the Warhammer world. Barrack Var is really far away, and this is a new location in that there won't have been many opportunities to create new and interesting relationships yet without them already being pre-planned. Now, you could argue that if one of the holds particularly a sea-going hold with sea-going interests, has made has established a formal relationship with Holzkrug, you could have something like that there. But again, I quite like reinforcing stereotypes so that we don't constantly contradict them everywhere. And the stereotype is that the dwarves and the Sigmarites work hand in hand. I mean, everything about the cult of Sigmar, and indeed the Empire, has been strongly influenced by the dwarves from top to bottom, right down to how the Empire itself is composed. If you take, for example, the model that Sigmar used to construct the Empire right at the beginning, where you had the Emperor, or in the dwarf case, the High King, standing over individual holds, standing over individual counties, elector counties, so to speak, as they became later, but standing over large tribal lands, each one of which had their own sovereign king, or in the case of the Empire, had its own sovereign, whichever particular title you wish to use. Clan chiefs it was, arguably, right at the very beginning with the tribal chiefs. And that works pretty much across the board. Everything from how language was put together to how coinage was organized to how roads were built and communication set up, strongly influenced by the dwarves. And Sigmarism and dwarf stuff tend to go hand in hand. So if we're looking to build up something that stands in opposition to Altdorf, which in many respects our version of Kalegen does, Altdorf is led by the Emperor, a walking, talking figure that represents Sigmarism, in the same way that in the UK, the King of England, or indeed the King of Britain, one could argue also, or King of Scotland, represents the Church of England, or indeed the Church of Scotland, and stands at the top of that. And the Emperor, in many respects, holds a position at the top, but not a position that is, inside the cult at least, equal to that of the Grand Theogenist. As we all know, the Grand Theogenist in the cult of Sigmar has a power unparalleled to almost anybody else, including the Emperor. So if we're looking to build natural allegiances, you'd be looking to build the dwarves potentially in opposition. And indeed, they may grumble at a city that has been built potentially and mostly by human engineers. So I think that if we do a connection with the dwarves, we'd be wanting to do something that stood separate to, and potentially as much as it may amount to it, an anarchistic faction of the dwarves, rather than a natural part of their High King down to King, Karak Angkor setup style of dwarves in the hold. So you'd be looking for perhaps expat dwarves from one of the major clans who have made a deal possibly with House Kalegen, House Holzkrug. Or alternatively, a rogue faction of their engineers guild that has been allowed to set up for one reason or another. I'd be looking to do something that tried to not necessarily undermine the major dwarf story, so to speak, but most certainly stand as something different and as a counterpoint to the standard setup that you'd expect to find over in Altdorf. So I think it's a good idea, but because Barak Var is so far away, and there is no immediate natural connection, I'm not sure that we should necessarily reflect that here. But if you can think of a good story to tie that in here, I'm well up for it. So yeah, do give it a go if you can think of one. And indeed, you've carried on with, well, as sneaky as dwarves get in War. Well, that's fair. Tend to get inside Warhammer. Yalab then says, for a total population like 4 dwarves in entire city, a dwarven tavern is probably a bit too much. So far, we have 4 dwarves. I mean, there's a possibility that one of the expatriate clans has been attracted or something. I mean, that we could do that. But again, I'd be looking for a justification and a good story for why they moved down. Why is the clan interested? What is it that they're maintaining? And then we can start building the conflicts between them and others who may be inside the town. I'm most certainly not against dwarves. They are one of the primary species in the Empire as a whole. And ensuring that they're reflected in some fashion or another is a good idea. And they're much more populous than, say, the elves. And as it stands, we're likely to have a relatively high elven population here in comparison to most other towns in most other cities, pardon me, in the Empire, largely because we are making this an ambassadorial hotspot. This is going to be a place that's going to attract politics, that's going to attract basically the stuff that high elves love. We all know that the Azure absolutely adore politics in a variety of different ways. Indeed, in previous versions of the High Elf Army list, you've even had rules for saying that the the general of the army could be not necessarily the most powerful character, which is almost always the case in Warhammer because of the interscene politics between the different nobles and some nobles outranking other nobles and the squabbling that comes from that. And reflecting the fact that this is an ambassadorial hotspot with at least a small elven enclave makes sense, but it would feel weird if there was more elves in town than there were dwarves. Now, that isn't necessarily something we don't want to lean out of. We could indeed make that a thing. There are far fewer dwarves than there are, for example, elves. But it would be rare, super rare, probably the only place in the Empire where this was the case if we did that. And if that's the case, a good story to reinforce that is well worth doing. Martin then suggests a floating slum downriver tied to the casino, a dozen or so river folk boats. They live off the discards of the casino folk. That's potentially nice, but the downriver would be what, this way? It would get in the where our downriver would be over here. I'm not sure I want to have a lot of unsightly vessels. They'd have been cleared out repeatedly by the Duke because our boats with our ambassadors are going to be coming up river here from potentially Karlberg or Marienburg, or maybe even Altdorf, because they're unlikely to go down through the Weissbruck Canal, for example. They're much more likely to go down through Karlberg and go upriver to here. That being the case, this is going to be an area that they're going to try and clear out of anything that is immediately unsightly, and having a giant pile of boats sitting there downriver, even if it's hanging off the casino, it seems relatively unlikely. But again, if you can build a good story for that, I'm well up for it. Yala then suggests we've talked, there probably won't be too much of a Dwarven presence. Yes, we have in the past. And as we've said throughout these streams, I'm quite happy to go in different directions as we go if we build good stories to justify it. But unless there's a really good story, I wouldn't worry too much about changing that premise. The bloke person says, alrighty then. Yes, fair enough. Again, though, if you can think of any way to tie in your idea, because I really quite like building connections that might be unexpected. For example, a barrack var connection would be unexpected. We can build a really nice story around why that would be the case, but we need to have one. Why was the king over in Barrack Var interested, enticed, or otherwise diplomatically cornered into providing some support here for one reason or another? Were they tricked? Were they not tricked? And if they were tricked, that means there would be a great deal of tension with the Halskrugs, which could make for an interesting situation as well. They are, however, very, very, very far away. They're it's over the entire distance of Europe in terms of the overall scale of the distance between them. They would very much be a foreign power. And why would a foreign power necessarily be doing much? Having said that, it might be quite nice to have a dwarven monitor or two or one of their ironclads drifting into here rather than necessarily popping up river to Altdorf. And why that's the case and what they've established locally could make for a really interesting story. So I am 100% not against it. I'm just wanting to make sure we build a cool story for it if we do use it. I suggest, also think we ended up not having a rope yard anywhere. Maybe that could go on the elongated part of land next to the VIP landing zone. Yeah, you could, although the actual building of ropes takes up, particularly for ships, a lot more space than you might really realize, because they twine them together in long straight lines, which means if you want yourself, for example, a cable that's going to be, say, 200 yards long, you need a 200-yard long stretch to actually build it. Most rope making factories tended to be out on the outskirts of the individual cities where they may have been building them, and some of them just took up an enormous stretch of land, up to like 300 yards long. And for the larger ships, the ropes and cables required are extensive. You need a lot of them. So I agree that having some form of local rope building makes sense. However, I think given the tightness of what we have here, it's more likely they would build a rope manufactory on the south here or up on the north on the outside of the walls, because of the enormous amount of space that it requires. The factory itself doesn't need to be that big. The parts where they're binding it all together, it would be almost certainly an engineering job, because doing it the old-fashioned way, which often required hundreds of people to bind together long cables, seems to be, for the Empire's level of technology, a waste of manpower, particularly given that this is meant to look like the new, the industrious, the interesting. So you could have, as an interesting sight to see for visiting dignitaries, the beginnings of a factory here where they're winding together the ropes from big long cables. So you'd only require a master rope maker and maybe about 8 or 9 or 10 rope makers to support them, rather than what would have been 200 to 300 very strong folks wrapping those cables together so they can get the longest cables for their ships. So I think on the outside would make more sense because we don't have enough space in this area to create long cables that are required for ships. There would just be no way to properly bind them. So I think probably having them over on the outside makes more sense. But again, if you disagree, pop in the comments and we can bring up a different idea. Look, hi, look, delighted to see you here. Potentially a stevedore guildhouse managing cargo transport for trade ships to guildhouse. We already have a stevedore guildhouse, which Martin immediately popped out, but I'll explain it so you know where it is. I won't go into depth because it was from a previous stream, but the stevedore guildhouse is all the way over here. They also deal with, we haven't decided where the Teamsters work there as well. So that'll be the people that are offloading from ground-based cargo, but rather than the ship-based ones. Stevedores are a very skilled group of folks, and gangs of stevedores with their special little stevedores caps will be working out from down there and coming up here. Now, would they have a pub or somewhere to gather around this area? Probably. We've already discussed various iterations of the stevedores popping into different locations around these areas, and possibly there'd be something that we should potentially highlight for in here as well. Yalab then suggests, yeah, we have gaffers or mine goods merchants, merchant houses, stevedores, and butchers are established guilds so far. Yes, we do. And we've also had discussions about, say, the Mourners Guild as well that will be working towards the big Garden of Moor to the north of the city. Luke says, first stream, thanks for letting me know. Not a problem. And indeed, don't be shy in offering other ideas because it's quite possible you'll offer something we just haven't considered at all so far. And the more ideas that we can squeeze onto the map, really the better. And it's also good to remind ourselves what we have done elsewhere to make sure that we get a nice balance of everything, make sure we haven't missed anything. So, yep, that's that. Martin then says, no worries, enjoy the stream. I agree. Yalb says, if we want dwarven tie to perhaps house groups or employing some dwarven mining specialists to try and find something else to mine in their declining mines before shutting them down for good, now that's a good idea. Now, for those of you who don't know, let's pull out on this one because I actually quite like that as a potential idea on how to do it. I have on this a nice little reference map that's sitting down in the bottom corner, which I'm just about to bring up for you. Let's zoom into that. Now, the Kalegen is obviously the big town here. I'm below the map layer. Let me just get onto the map layer so that we can see it. Here we go. Reference map here. Okay, now Kalegen, as you note, the easiest, if you've got ambassadors coming from Altdorf, which is here, they will almost certainly make their way downriver and then up to here. There is another route, which is to go down the Weisbruck Canal, down and then up that way. But most will go by the river because the Weisbruck Canal is expensive and is largely designed for barges, which, although some barges are relatively sizable, they're still small vessels. A lot of the ambassadorial vessels will be far larger. Now, Kalegen gets most of its money from the Herzog Schwart. I have no idea how to pronounce that correctly for you German folk out there who are now cringing, going, why, Andy, why? But the Herzog Schwart is up there. And that's where they have their mines. They have themselves a couple of canals that lead down towards Kalegen there, and another canal from the Speltergrube up here that moves down towards the Weisbruck Canal, towards the Weisbruck's biggest water area, which is by Jägel there. And the Holzkrug's mines are currently kind of playing out. Now, that doesn't mean that they're empty. Indeed, given the mining techniques that are probably used by the imperial miners that they have there, there is probably a whole host of untapped wealth inside the mountains over there. But it has yet to be discovered. And I think that possibly with the amount of money coming in beginning to drop, there's silver down there, there's coal down there, there's, what else have we said that was down there? There was various other ores. We had a whole discussion about this in a previous one. But there's a nice mixture of stuff down there. And as it's beginning to run out, bringing in specialists does make sense. Paying for them to come in makes a lot of sense. So I think that reflecting those somewhere is a really, really good idea and giving them somewhere to live inside the city. However, the most likely places for that to go would be probably down by Here we go. This is the canal that's making its way up to the mountains here. Let me just get my pen on. Up there. That's a really small pen now. Let's go a bit bigger so you can actually see the lines I'm making. So having the dwarves located somewhere around here, to me, makes the most sense. Some sort of little ambassadorial set up, or alternatively, no, in fact, I think somewhere that represents one of the holds, a hold that the Hull's crews have approached and asked, do you have anything? So there'll be an official request to the king of one of the local holds. Now, the most local holds that we have to here are probably... I mean, you've got Carrick Ziflin down there, Carrick, what's his face, down by Ubersreich. They're the two primary holds that everyone's aware of. You also have Carrick Barrack or something sitting slightly further down. Then you go right down to the Hornhold and such like, further down the Black and then into the Grey Mountains, and then into the World's Edge. Quite a lot of distance. I think it's less likely that the actual geographic distance matters, and more likely to be the one that Hallskrug has made good relations with in the court of Altdorf. Hallskrug is pretty much permanently ensconced in Altdorf, except when he's coming out for various reasons to come to Kalegen. He's an extremely important figure inside the city, and depending on which version of him you use, he could potentially also be someone who is connected to various nefarious undercurrents as well. But that's very much not the version that I'm building for this version of Kalegen. So possibly he has made himself some relatively close ties to one of the primary ambassadors from one of the holds. And that being the case, I think our version, if we do go down that route, I think our version of Hallskrug should certainly have a beard, because dwarves respect humans that have beards more than don't, or have long hair if they're women, just for cultural reasons. So if we want to reinforce that, you probably want to make sure that our version of Hallskrug has got a pretty impressive beard, or one that he's decided to grow so that he can maintain better relations with his dwarven allies, or attempt to impress them. So I think that makes sense. And I think possibly over here, right beside the little middle class zone that we're building there, makes sense for that. And if you've got any extra details that we could drop on that, feel free to drop it in. Martin, I suggest I'm trying to scroll the map on my tablet to see what's been drawn so far. Always a good idea. For El, so far, we've talked mostly about an Aenir camp, absolutely, outside the city. The Aenir are going to be super interested in this place. The Aenir are the wood elves from the Lorelorn up in the north, and my version of the Aenir are aggressively political and aggressively manipulative. They have a direct interest in ensuring that the Empire does what it wants, and have been playing with the Empire in one fashion or another like a toy for a good couple of thousand years. They have a host of policies that they can only enact by ensuring that they're right in the thick of it. And with the recent prophecies that have been coming from their own seers, they're very interested in ensuring that the Empire goes in a direction that they choose. So definitely sitting on the outside somewhere. Not so much about a permanent presence within town, except maybe the Heiress's teacher and an envoy to the Lord. Yes, I think we're looking at a different type of elf. We'll be looking at the Azure, and the Azure will be intensely interested in this place as well, and they'll have an embassy. And I think it'll just be as simple as an embassy representing the I mean, would it be the Phoenix King himself? Probably. It'll be Finnubar the Seafarer's interests in what is becoming a highly diplomatic town. So a secondary embassy to the primary one over in Altdorf. They've also got an embassy down in Nuln. They've also got their biggest one over in Marienburg, and they've got a bunch others spotted around here or there. So I think possibly a relatively freshly built, organized embassy will have nice white walls in place, perhaps a single tower, perhaps a single wizard that's working from there as well, or at least perhaps an empty tower for the wizard that should be there, who's perhaps somewhere else doing something else. If you want to tie it through to the starter set, it could perhaps be tied to maybe even this could be somewhere where Imreith Emberfell works from, or something similar. There's things you could do to try and tie them together, but that's not necessary. But definitely representative of the High Elves in town somewhere. If it's Midland land, or potentially ground conflict between the Duke and the casino owner, yes, there is potentially some significant issues here, and the the Duke of Midland is probably utterly unaware of the fact that this place even exists. At least so far, it will be sitting inside a loophole, and I think one of our adventure hooks will be the awareness of Karaberg as they discover that effectively there's somebody who's not being properly taxed down there, sending boats in to cause a bother, and them, the local casino, and the lords who are and ladies that are using it, being somewhat upset that someone should interrupt their fun, asking for help from the Reikland side, the Reikland coming to the help was effectively kind of like declaring war. And that could be a really fun set of adventure hooks that we work through. Martin then suggests the casino lets the slum build up a little until the Duke starts to grumble and only agrees to clear the drifters after favors have been exchanged. I don't think it would be allowed. I think we need more than that, because it would be an unsightly mess, and they just won't be happy with it. It will have been shut down fast by those who are responsible. Plus, the casino owner themselves will have no interest in having this ragtag horror sitting beside their casino that is going to drive away potentially the clientele that they're looking to attract. Having said that, though, if it can be somehow made largely invisible, I'm up for it completely, because I love the idea of the contrast of poor beside rich. And it's something that we're drilling in down relatively hard with our slums sitting underneath our upper class areas over there. And I think it's also important because I think it reinforces our primary tone of this place is largely a facade. It's one giant mask. And having the idea of this very rich area with something very poor beside it, which is the reality, the workers and all the horrors that they have to survive through to provide the services to the upper classes, sitting right beside it, so just behind the mask, is a good idea. But we'll need to make sure that if we are adding that it is invisible. So, for example, it could be the lower decks down at the bottom are filled with it, or it could be they're living under the pier, some way of hiding it. So if you can think of something that will allow it to be hidden, so that when the passing dignitaries go by, they don't see it at all, 100% behind that. I think it works really well. The bloke person then suggests perhaps the ruling party of Kalegen invited a barrack ship building a clan to improve their shipbuilding, but the money for the little project fell apart, and now the clan are somewhat, and he continues, stranded thanks to the expenses of getting there, and thus the tavern they run is basically built out of their old offices. Now that's a story. I think there might be something in that. Hold on that while I go down and finish off the rest of the comments, because I think I like that. While the casino is built on piles like an oil platform, the drifters are established underneath and largely obscured by hang banners and panels. Yes, that. It looks like we had the same idea. Then Luke suggests a VIP landing strip, a pavilion, and assembly square for the local troops. Lightman brings out the Knights of the Swan, plus the local state troops out to put on a show for visiting dignitaries. Yes, absolutely. That area is largely at the moment held slightly further down here, where the state troops are often brought out. There's nice little barracks. There's lovely little statues. There's lots of places for people to stand up to attention and look very impressive. There's also a coach house over here, so visiting dignitaries can come in, get in a rather impressive coach, and then trap their way up the main road. Absolutely agree with that. Well worth it. Luke then says, perhaps it leaves the rest of the city undermanned, creating opportunities for smugglers and ne'er-do-wells to take advantage, vanity at the cost of city security. I love it. Indeed, I think that's a really nice plot hook that I think we should probably, if we're going to write that in, probably write that into the State Army barracks, which are going to be all the way up behind the reference map. Let's just get rid of the reference map there. All the way up here, and where the original was one of the original buildings in the location before the city started getting built up strongly about 70 to 50 years ago, depending on which part of the city we're talking about. Marlon suggests a smaller pier below and a large purple location off it is all for receiving visiting dignitaries. Yeah, I think definitely we have something to build here. There's a couple of smuggling rings up north, one operating at the old fishing village, yes, and another involved with the logging dock, absolutely. And then finally, Yalib says, for Azure, perhaps not full-blown embassy, but more of a consulate. I think actually that's a very good idea. Okay, so now we've got the idea of what we want to do. Let's have a quick look. We've got the potential for some stranded dwarves who were brought in around about 50 years ago when they were first building up the shipbuilding, and for one reason or another are stranded and have stayed for their own personal reasons. And I think there's a good story there, potentially for old clans dwarves meeting the Empire and finding expatriate dwarves and being very snobby about them and ending up living with them for a few years, and then potentially clan ties getting made and people refusing to go. So when Barak Var eventually reclaimed their people, some decided to stay because they built up families locally, and that caused a bit of tension. I think definitely a repurposed building from once being a shipbuildings group now being turned into effectively an inn, and possibly something undermined underneath it because they're dwarves and almost can't help themselves. I think there's definitely something in that. They'll be attempting to recreate their own holds. If we're doing that, I'm not sure here is the right place. I'm not sure it's not either. Do we want to have that here? When what is effectively the boggy area, when they're going to look to try and build something solid? No, they're going to want to go to solid land because they're dwarves. So I think that we maintain our idea of leaving it by the middle class area, but that idea needs to be definitely kept. So I'm going to go into there and I'm going to drop in a quick. Oops, I can't. That's not. Go away. I don't want you. I'm right just there. Dawi ship. And yeah, that'll do. Our Darby can sit there. Love that. Next, our elves, if we're bringing them in. Now, elves, unlike the others, will want to be able to have complete privacy, which means that they're going to want to have their small eagle ships or their smaller, that's on the warship side, or their smaller incoming merchant vessels to have their own location to dock that doesn't get interrupted by others, that immediately goes into what is effectively their own land. And if they want to take anything out of that land, they'll need to then pay taxes. But if they don't, then they'll have effectively their own little consulate embassy area where they can bring it in and out whatever they want, because effectively their land within the greater land. So that means that they need to have some form of jetty or pier that they can land in, which means that we do want it over in this part of the city. And we want to have it reclaiming an area here. Now, it might be worth removing this tower completely and replacing that with an azure area instead, and having ourselves a slender white pier kicking out there with a nice little tower on it or something equally flowery. And the local Hallskrugs will have been utterly loving the idea of that, because the idea of seeing some elves or elven constructed buildings as their other embassies arrive will do nothing more than impress other folks. So he'll have been well up for that. So I think that does make sense. But I quite like the idea of keeping that one. So maybe having it over here, or indeed we could even put it way out so that we can have a potential disagreement with the locals, where the elves can then make an outreach to Karaberg and say, we're having some problems. How about we attach ourselves instead of to that pier? We break ourselves up, we attack ourselves to that one instead. Classic piece of high elven nonsense where they're looking to sit on the bridge and do whatever they want without having anyone interfere with their plans. So I quite like the idea of potentially moving them over there and making perhaps this section here our high elf section. If anyone's got any ideas on that, do drop them in. But I'm now going to start drawing out this area because I think we've got a strong idea of the various things that we want to put in there. So I'm going to rub out that section entirely, and I think we're going to put our elves there because that is something that we can. So it's going to be a long thin jetty. It's going to need to be at least long enough for an eagle ship to berth there. So eagle ships are called. They're going to be about that size, and an elven trading vessel is going to be not too much larger either. So that, yeah, that would do, which means we now need to have ourselves an area where it'll be blocked off completely for themselves, with an elven tower sitting on each corner at least, elven gates sitting here, so an elven gate there, that they've purposely built with enough space in front of it that they could easily just break this bit off here and then build it up onto there at a later date if you wish to do so. I quite like that as an idea. The building itself will probably be something like that, with a secondary gatehouse and a tower sitting above it. Yeah, I like that. I think we've definitely got a place to receive guests. Yeah. Yeah. This loosely works. Quite like this. Okay, so we've got an idea of where our elves are going to go. Next job is to consider what we're going to do with our floating casino, which we're probably going to, instead of making it a boat, we'll make it something that's on the end of the pier, and has long hanging banners down all sides showing different households. Perhaps they're also tasked with dropping down the heraldry of local, or pardon me, of visiting ambassadors, or the heraldry of visiting dignitaries. And that heraldry hides in the lower parts of the pilings, all manner of horror living down below. I like that quite a lot. I think there should be an open platform near the top where they can have faux towers sitting out. This place looks like it's a fortified location, but the fortifications are largely for show. A lot of the stonework will be covering the fact it's built with wood. The building itself is going to be old enough that it's already begun to rot in several places, likely to collapse at some point if they're not careful. The water has slowly eroded at the strength of the building. I'm quite liking that as an idea. If anyone brings out any extra ideas to attach to this as we go, I will add those on afterwards. We're going to need some sort of big, impressive set of steps that lead up to it to make everyone go, ooh, ah. The oohs and the ahs there, very important. And we're going to require somewhere enough space for coaches to turn round up here, which means that they will have built a wider area around that. The coaches, however, are not allowed to stay here. As I recall, actually, we discussed that we wouldn't do that. I'm going to delete that because we can't get over to Middenland. So I'm going to get rid of that. We're going to have a place for the coaches to turn here. And they're going to have to walk out to it from here at the earliest. Got to make sure that it makes sense. So let's just pop in a road there. And I think that we're possibly also going to have out here some buildings to hold coaches on their own separate pilings for important visiting dignitaries. And some can also land here if they're coming by vessel. Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. So we have quite a long bit of pier here that potentially we should figure out exactly what it does, because is this, what's the length for? Why is it so long? Exactly how does it manifest the way that it does? I definitely think there's something that we need to resolve there, because this appears to be a relatively big area of space. We probably want some extra buildings sitting on the edge of this. For some of the important staff to live in, or whatever else we decide to do with them. Small. Oh, there's going to be all manner of crime working out of here as well. Whoops. Adobe's trying to get me to do things. Let me just get rid of that. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to work down this pier, look at the comments again, and then work from there. Okay. So this is going to be mostly just pier for the workers. So during the day, much of that's going to be taken up by actual. That being the case, we're going to want to have a separate jetty coming off it to bound that. And then another separate one over here. They're taking in fish. And we want to possibly consider as well how some of that's been salted and stored. Let me just sort out the little roads that we have at the bottom here. Fill those in. Okay. I'm sort of getting an idea of what this place looks like in my head. I'm not entirely convinced about it yet, but it's sort of falling into some form of sense in my mind. Yeah. Rickety old buildings sitting along there. Okay. I'm still not 100% convinced by that. It sort of makes sense to me. I just feel like there should be something a bit more that makes sense out there. I'm not sure what it is yet. Okay, our High Elven section there. Let's end it. So, okay. Our temporary bridge, which has become almost permanent to a degree, sitting here. Quite like the idea that it's not been lifted for a while. Shipbuilding areas have not ground to a halt per se, but they're not as fast as they used to be. Okay, yep, that makes a lot of sense to me. We're going to have to make it work in sections as well. So our boarded sections, so our dignitaries can get across. We're going to have a wall that works down here with a gatehouse moving through that. Yep, that makes sense. Let's double check the comments before I move on over there. Right, so comments, where were we? Here, perhaps? We could land in the barge building area. They could. To the bloke says, to like the idea that a few streams ago, perhaps they're the ones that started the Venetian arsenal style building methods and are mad they are not running things, as in the dwarves. It's not really a dwarven architectural style as in the Venetian style buildings. So I'm not sure they make the best link, assuming that's what you're talking about. If it's something else, drop it in as a comment. Elven Consulate right next to the VIP landing zone makes sense. It would look impressive. Another option could be just outside the city to the south of the riverside. I don't think they'd be given permission to be outside the city, nor do I think they'd want to be outside of the city. They like to get in the thick of it, but in a fashion that allows them to be separate and allow their hoity-toity noses to be nicely lifted away from the horrible humans. Their own jetty, nice ivory tower, separate wall, and have more space for gardens. Yeah, I still reckon I'm relatively happy with my small part here because it's small, but I'm quite happy to change that to something else if we get a good idea for why. Just a note, I was typing alongside Andy, drawing it on the pier, so never mind me. It being in the water is also cool and crowds that area nicely. It does crowd that area nicely. Gnome croupiers, we can't go wrong with a few gnome croupiers. If you've got an idea for where they go, give me a call. I thought they had to jump over the gap. Yes, they do have to jump over the gap, hence me changing what I did there. For the casino, could it initially been created at first of the defensive towers, but as one of the first delegations of Carlsberg has arrived and discovered it's actually made on the mainland side of the border and such as swiftly claimed by them. I don't want Midland to claim it at all. I want it to be entirely abused by the locals to avoid the restrictive Reikland gambling laws. So I want Midland to be completely unaware of it in the greater scheme of things. Although I think finding out about it will be part of its core story moving forwards. Beside the casino, we also want a regular trade going on there with passing goods over the border on land and just loading them on ships once on the Midland side. Yeah, that's why we had the longer port. Thank you very much for reminding me that. And yes, I'll reinforce that in the drawing in a moment. Bloke Person says, like the old UK sea forts World War II, but in the water, perhaps a little bit more Warhammer-fied. Yeah, that sort of idea. Yeah, I'll then suggest perhaps with a special permit from the Duke required to transport goods over the jetty. I think, yeah, you'll need to pay the tax. You are, after all, crossing a border, which gives us a nice opportunity to plop some harbour tax office next to pier entrance. Yes, I agree. And I think that's a good idea. Venetian style shipbuilding referred to the building ships from the pre-made elements, I'm pretty sure. Gotcha. Just making sure. And yep, yeah, says boat person. Good. Okay, cool. Right. So that being the case, I'm going to go back up to there, and I'm going to add myself a clear office that's sitting here for the taxation to work from. I'm also going to want to ensure that this part here can be used by ship. How long is that? Let's press Control H and bring up my grid. Oh, wow, I can barely see it. Okay, so that, let me just find myself a square that I can actually see. I need to zoom out to see that. That's far too close. All right, here we go. I can see them there. So that's about 10 yards. So that means that thing there is around about 25 yards. That's a pretty small area for some. I mean, that's the length of some of the barges. They would sit there. And if we're looking for a large cargo vessel, I need to move this. That is in the wrong place if we're going to use the port for that. That would need to be over here or down this side, but we can't put it there because of the elves. We could flip it round and pop it on the end of the pier there instead. That would give you enough space to get in a vessel and turn it around as well as required. So yeah, I'll do that instead. Build it into there. Yeah, okay. That loosely makes sense. Wall that area off as well, because elves. Yeah, okay, cool. That gives us a nice area. Okay, before I move on from here, is there anything anyone else thinks should be out on these piers? I'm going to color this area in so we have all of this wharf done and then move into the next big location down here. Still not sure how my elven buildings are going to look. These are very much they're definitely elven buildings. I just don't know what they look like yet. Situation. I'll maybe have a think on that and make them look a little bit different later. Just that they have a slightly different architectural style sitting on them. But yeah, if there's anything anyone else thinks should go there, tell me now. I'll drop it on, and then we can get these areas colored in. Yalib says that could be something introduced by the dwarves and stay in use after they were ousted from that side of things. Yes, it could be. Well, unlucky comment, didn't make it due to stream delay. That was the relation to the modular shipbuilding. Yeah. I gathered that. Martin Root says, slightly confused. I thought the point of the gap of the bridge to avoid taxes, it is, and or restrictive Reikland rules, it is. But isn't that undermined if they have to buy a permit, essentially a tax? Yes, it is. So you're confusing two things. One is the trade taxes, and the other one is the gambling taxes. This is would be an attempt to completely circumnavigate the taxes of Karaberg. The Reikland, by dropping in here, dropping into some stores, and then passing it off elsewhere. But to do that, you'll need to pay a local tax with the local tax office. So you're effectively trying to lower your tax burden. Taking goods across there is going to be a tough ask. I'm still not sure how it will best manifest. The write-up will nail this down. I like the idea of setting up for a variety of different options for when we pin it down in the writing, though. Yav says a small donation to local orders, perhaps smaller than a full proper tax. Yes, that exactly. And it having an element of political corruption makes it not wildly available. That also, I think, makes sense. Basically, it's to scam that rich, powerful, and connected that have access to, while regular merchant must follow the rules. All of that, yes. I can see this being the Rickert Gwellners, for example, one of the larger merchant families of Altdorf. They almost certainly would be aware of this sort of scam and would be looking to utilize it. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if it was only a single merchant house that was responsible for doing this, rather than something that many use. So one merchant house has found effectively a giant tax loop that they're using through there, and it's a similar tax loop to the one that's being used by the gambling casino up there. So it looks like no other further ideas have come in for that part. So I'm just going to fill in the colors on this section. Zoom out slightly, and then move into the next section. So let's do those. Our colors, as we've discussed multiple times in our other streams, we have a brown color for our standard buildings. We have ourselves a purple color for our special locations. And if you want to know the techniques that I've used to build this, there was a tutorial given on the Rookery some time ago now, where I explained exactly how to do this style of map and every single last part of how this style of map is built. Do I want to have that as just a location, or do I want that as a special location? I think that was a special location. There we go. The tutorial explained what brushes I used, in this case, one. And importantly, this entire stream, as we build Kalegen, is being built using only the techniques that I used in that tutorial over on the Rookery. You can get the access to that over in the Rookery's Patreon. Just type the Rookery Patreon, and it'll probably pop up. And everything that I'm doing in this uses the techniques from that and nothing else. I'm doing nothing special or different with this. It's all working at some, I want that as a road color. Let me just get rid of that. There we go. I'll get back to doing that. So if you want to be able to make a map like this yourself at home, you should be able to do so by checking out that tutorial and giving it a go. Do I want that like that? Yes, I do. Let me just pop into the roads and make that a road. Right, and then go back to my lines and add a little bit of loose texture here. Nothing too much, just enough to give the idea that there's wood being used in the areas, but I'll leave it the color of the roads. So that'll explain how we do the shades and the highlights and everything. Just grab a different brush, that size. Pop the shades into place. Right. Nice. And then if we've got a separate part that's coming out there, that will raise up further, and then it'll go at that angle, like so. Okay. That's higher. Let's drop our shades around our little high elven bit, which for some reason unknown to man I didn't color in. So let's do that now. Location. I want to have. In fact, that brush will do just fine. Okay. Back to my shades. Dropping a little shade there too while I'm at it. Right. Uncharacteristically silent there for a few moments while I try to figure out how I best wanted to organize that. I will look at the comments again once I have finished off the highlights and the shades for this area, where you can, if I've missed anything, you feel that anything should be added, you can drop it in then, and I'll cover that. Okay, cool. Highlights, and I need a thinner brush for that. 3. Let's just quickly pop a couple of those on. Okay, that's forming up nicely. Oh, I forgot 2 shades on this end. Go to my shades layer again and do that. Again, the shades are not done with a great deal of care because most of them are going to get covered by a variety of different things as we move on. They are there purely for the effect they provide, and we can tidy them up at the very end if that's required. Okay, cool. That appears to be our little pier area in place. Let's check if there's any other comments for a minute. Oh, apologize for leaving the comment up there as I was doing that. Wasn't paying attention. Martin says casino is a front or outright owned by the merchant house. You know what? That would be a good idea because that could be a method of combining both of those into a single plot line and make it a little bit easier to handle in terms of its write-up. So I think this is almost certainly going to be handled by House Rickert Gewellner. That's one of the primary mercantile houses of Altdorf. They've popped up here or there now and then. They're also strongly tied to the Knights Panther. The very first Grand Master of the Knights Panther, as I recall, was a Rickert, I think. Can't remember, for the merging of House Rickert and Gewellner. And they were originally nobles and no longer are. So yeah, House Rickert Gewellner. Consider the head of House Rickert Gewellner somewhat like a Rupert Murdoch figure. He's a very old man. And has a great deal of influence and sway across the empire in a variety of ways most don't realize. So I definitely think some sort of tax dodging thing going on here is a good idea. Very much supports the theme of his family. I think they would be separate. That creates more tension between them. That's also a good idea. I think I agree. I think I would rather have the mercantile aspect handled by House Rickert Gewellner. And if that's the case, I'm going to need to add something there in terms of a purple location to reflect that. And then we can have the, so I think you can have the tax dodging casino and then House Rickert Gewellner muscled in on their idea. And they're so influential that, yeah. I think that works well. So let's have some sort of building to reflect that on the map. One to that's way too small for a brush. One to represent Rickert Gewellner concerns. And sitting over effectively in Middenland, so not having to deal with the local merchant guild tax dues. They'll be using their tax dues from Karaberg without telling anyone that they're doing that. In Karaberg, that is. Yeah, I like that. The more I think about it, the more that makes sense. So let me just quickly color in that wee building, give it a bit of a color and shade, and then we're good to go. I want her shades. Shade. And there. And then a quick highlight on the other side too. The brush is a bit big, but whatever, that'll do. Cool. Okay. No, there's no shade on the other side of that. Let me just pop that in. Shade. There we go. Okay, let's see. There's any other comments before I move into the next area? Casino is worried merchants will draw attention. Merchants are worried casino will draw attention. Perhaps cargo is going missing sometimes. Yeah, I definitely think there's something in this. Perhaps a warehouse for the merchant family there and a nice mansion somewhere in the city to exert pressure and enlightenment where necessary. Yeah, I think both of those things are absolutely spot on. And I think this building here is probably a multi-tiered warehouse. Probably looking around about a classic like 3, 4, maybe 4-story warehouse, tall empire building, a bit creaky and rickety, even though it is relatively new in the greater scheme of buildings. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, particularly because we can have a nice little plot where maybe it gets blown up or washed away, goods all over the dock, all over the river. There's all manner of cool fun that we can do with that. Yeah, I like that quite a bit. Anything else here before we move on? One last comment before I move to the next bit. Also, we can get a spelling of that family name somewhere. Can indeed. Rickert. Can I remember it? Rickert. I can't remember. It's the Rickert part goes. Rickert. I think that's right. Oh, well, the Gwellner's definitely correct. Rickert perhaps is correct. I'll go check up the spelling for that later. The Gwellner is definitely correct. One of the hills in Altdorf was actually named after that family, Gwellner Hill. It gets mentioned here or there in at different points. I dropped it on one of my original maps for Altdorf Zoo, of all things, a long time ago, before I was even working on the game. I did a very quick map for my own games of Altdorf Zoo, which you might find out somewhere, and it's right beside the Gwellner estate on there too. I liked when I was doing my earlier maps, referencing little sections of Warhammer lore in everything that I was doing, because kind of couldn't help myself. Alrighty, so let's move on to our next area. All right, so I think we'll do this section down here, decide what's going on here. We're going to need to have some relatively open areas for holding goods, assuming that we're taking any goods in here. We also have ourselves a large fort, which we're going to need to gain access to. I think we're going to build this in a similar style. Is that on the lines layer? No, it's not. So what on earth layer do I have that on? Is that on the wall layer? No. Oh, yes, it is. There we go. So I'm going to get rid of that little sketchy thing. No, I'm going to draw over it first, then get rid of the sketchy thing. So we're going to want to have something relatively similar to Belém Tower, which we mentioned before. If you want to know what that looks like, let me just quickly grab you Control C, Control V of its location on Google Maps. That's what it looks like above. If you want to go check out Belém Tower, that'll give you enough details to go Google it up yourself if you wish to do so. We already have over in the Discord channel where we're discussing everything we're putting into Kalegen, a link to Belém Tower. I think that was presented by Martin at some point in the previous stream. And again, if you've got anything that you'd like me to go look up for ideas for how buildings could look, drop the links over into the Discord channel. I'll give a direct link to that channel, assuming that I can, if it lets me. Kalegen, there it is. And if I get a link, copy link, and I will paste that over for you. So this is a link directly through to the Discord channel. That's up in the comments now. That'll take you directly to the place where we're discussing Kalegen. That was a thread that was open, I think, originally by Yalub. Feel free if you've got any other ideas for things that we could put in, or if you just want to write out an idea that's already been discussed and you think you've got a better version of it, or if you think you've got a really cool adventure hook for anything that we've already discussed in this stream or any of the other ones, drop it in there and we'll get it all collated together and popped over into World Amble when we build our World Amble page for that. Right, so we're moving on to the next area. So we're going to make it look relatively similar to the Belém Tower, because I quite like the idea of that high tower with an area in the front where we can drop all of our cannons, or otherwise drop a whole host of troops standing at attention wearing Hall's crew colors. So when a visiting dignitary arrives in front of them, they'll see all those troops holding their halberds or whatever particular weapon of interest that we go for to characterize each one of these regiments. I think halberds is most likely because they'll be going for a traditional look to try and reinforce the fact that they are a traditional Reikland family, regardless of how they operate, which is not traditional. But definitely a traditional Reikland family that is a serious contender for the overall Reikland politics. So let's zoom in a little bit here. So we're nice and close. Control H to get rid of my walls. And I want a size 6 brush to put this in place. So first we're going to build ourselves, I think, the smaller tower at the back, which will be approximately a square. And as I discussed in my tutorial for doing this style of map, I rarely worry if my lines are perfectly straight for this style of map, because that slightly wonky, higgledy-piggledy feel reinforces the style being slightly more handmade rather than computer generated, even though it's an obvious computer generated map. Okay, so we've got ourselves the base of a tower in place here, which we will extend further with an outer. So that's our primary fortification that the State Army uses. Moving out to a secondary fortification coming out from the front there, where we can hold our that line's pretty squint, but whatever. And then tap that in a little bit. That should be about there, actually. Let me just delete that bit. That bit was wrong. In fact, I'm going to cheat because I want to get this a bit more square, because this is actually quite unsquare, and turn this around. Yeah, I wasn't too far off. Yeah, it wasn't too far off at all, actually. I'm a little bit surprised. So I want that about there. Moving back. Like so. Love it. Let's make sure they're all nice and similarly sized for our towery bits. A bit larger there as well. Okay. I'm also going to put a couple of extra buildings on this, sitting off at the side for various storerooms, for the powder store, whatever. Our troops can all line up in files and ranks there. That all works nicely. We can get our cannons on this. We can, yeah. It being the Empire, though, we need a proper roof over the top of it, because they do love their roofing. So pop that in place too. Okay, yeah, I think we've got ourselves a relatively decent shape building there. Now, before I finish off on the drawing on this, I will check if there's any comments regarding individual shapes. Warhammer Wiki message, Lord Carl Rickard Gwellner. Rickard, that's it. Lord Carl. Interesting. It's Carl Rickard. Yeah, the Rickard Gwellners moved to eventually become one family. But the Rickard family and the Gwellner family still exist, and the Rickard name pops up again and again throughout their history. So Carl Rickard will just be one of the Gwellner family. Warhammer Wiki, be interesting. That's also how you spell Rickard, by the way, not the way I spelt it. So that is the correct spelling. Couldn't remember it off the top of my head. That was just my comments that I dropped in. And parade halberds, pike and shot for actual weaponry. Yeah, totally. Very, very possibly. Although, having said that, though, pike combat is not favored in the Empire, primarily because so much of their combat doesn't take place on traditional battlefields, and is taking place in and around trees, in and around forested areas. So the long pikes are much less useful for weapons. So you tend to find Empire weaponry doesn't involve much pikes. Now, if we're doing it a bit more historically realistically, one could argue pikes would almost certainly be all over the place throughout, say, Averland, much of Stirland and Wizenland, where there's obviously forested areas down there, but they're far smaller. But for the Reikland and for the, much of Midland as well, it's just much more difficult to fight in a standard fashion. Right, so that seems to be a relatively good shape, so I'm happy to keep that. I will now twist that back round to the orientation that I want and drop it there. If anyone thinks that there should be anything else on that, tell me now. It needs a little bit of sharpening up, actually, and the twist didn't like that. I am going to now zoom out just a little and go down here and get rid of that. Because I'm going to replace it with that. Now I'm going to copy the base shape and then change some of the details. This is something that I sometimes do when I'm doing, and I want that a bit more central here, when I'm doing professional work, but I tend to just repeat my drawings rather than, oops. And get that a little bit more aligned to the wall as it currently stands. So that should be there. And we can give each one a little bit of individual details. We go past each one rather than it just being a copy paste across the line, which isn't quite as much fun. For example, the one here, we're going to add a lighthouse to. For any who know my past, you'll know that I do enjoy a good lighthouse. I grew up at the very north of Scotland and lived in a lighthouse for a significant period of my life. I used to do tours around that light when I was a kid. And I did those tours for free because I did, but I used to get quite a lot of tips, which was a nice and handy way of supplementing my pocket money when I was wee. Those were the days when I was tiny, doing tours around a lighthouse. I had a nice little visitor's book, which I still somewhat regret that I didn't take when we left the light, because I was the last person to do any tours around that light. Okay, we have ourselves a lighthouse on that one, and I'll also make a slight difference on this one. If anyone's got any ideas for what we could do with the middle fort there, do tell me now. I think it's a bit causing a bit too much of a blockage for my primary route in here, so I'm going to shift it over. Oops, I'm on the wrong layer. In fact, I don't really like it where it's sitting. I might actually shift it onto the other side so it can guard the entire harbor. That makes more sense to me. That makes a lot more sense to me. So the ones that are definitely isolated, I'm going to provide them with a small wharf as well, so that there's an easy way to get people over there. Yeah, that makes more sense to me. So if you've got any other ideas for those, now is the time to bring them up. I'm going to go check them once I've got rid of the little sketchy lines that we had setting for these. Get rid of those. I'll get rid of the one that's up in the far end here too. Right, so 1, 2, 3 forts. Love it. Let's see if there's any other comments on that one. One of the supposedly impressive river forts has foundations on a silt bank. It's started to settle, opening up alarming cracks and threatening to collapse completely. Damn straight. I like that. And why not have this one here? And we want each one to have its own little flavor. So this one here, its flavor is lighthouse. If we're going for the Boggy March area, it's probably this one here. And we can have like the entirety of the things beginning to crack up and looking a bit of a mess. I like that a lot. I'm going to, in fact, make it that one and start drawing on it now, so that we can give the impression that's exactly what's happening. So let me just pop up onto the lines layer. Give the idea that parts of this have already begun to creak and crack and begin to break down. Also give the idea that parts that have been shored up, so we can have ourselves some pilings that we can see over onto this side of it to try and help hold it into place. Actual hole in the roof near the top of that one. It's the idea that this one feels a bit more worn. We don't need to do very much to it. Just a little bit here or there to just give it a little bit of its own character. After all, as we've mentioned many times, this is a very, very small location in terms of the overall map. So putting all those extra details on is rarely going to be seen. So you don't want to be spending too much time just twiddling around, making it look perfect from above. Right, that'll do for a little bit of flavor on that one. Let's see what the next comment is. The two northern forts probably want to be a bit less involved. Maybe the one at the canal mouth is only the tower to make more space for shipping. Yeah, I moved that, as you now see, and I'm quite liking keeping it as is, just because it's got quite a lot of flavor to it. I quite like those two staying as is as well. The northern one up here, though, I mean, that's the first one you're going to see when you arrive, but it really is far away from the barracks. Do I want to make that one smaller? I don't know. What do you think? Do we want to make that one smaller? I quite like the idea of the repeated template being used. These things are relatively expensive to make, but in the overall scheme of things, not that expensive. Some of the other buildings in this area, I mean, they're relatively big. Let me just bring up the Control H. Let me bring it up. The tower itself is not that big. The tower is relatively small. It's about, I don't know, it's about 10, 12, it's about 12 meters, I think, across. So around about 12, 15 yards, something like that. I mean, it's big, but if anyone's got any strong opinions on that, bring them up. Martin says, the old workers swear the foundation was solid when it was built. I bet they did. Add a chain house to the middle fort. So something sitting in between the two of them. So I'm going to presume you mean this fort here. So we can get ourselves something that bridges between. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. In fact, I think that's quite a good idea. And you can even have little drawbridges working between those. And this one can have its own flavor because of that. I like that. Good idea. Let's quickly pop that in place. Add a couple of extra pilings around the edge. Brush is a bit big, but whatever. Yeah, okay. Cool. Let's move now. And then Alexander then says, now that you moved that tower, maybe a smaller tower with a chain house in the dock area. Yeah, maybe. In fact, that one's beginning to fall apart. I'm not sure how I'm going to deal with this one yet. I don't think that I want to add anything extra to the old village, which is a bit dodged there. I think I'd rather add a small wharf where they can land their State Army chaps into. I think that works a little bit better. They can roll them over. They can have stores rolled over to them. I think I prefer that better. But again, if anyone's got any ideas for something better, ping me on it. Yalab says, you moved the one at the mouth after my comments, so now fine to be large rest. Excellent. Delighted to hear that. Yeah, I think it works too. Maybe for the north one, let's drop the central building in the front yard. Yeah, we definitely need some sort of difference there. And we also want to try and reinforce what it's being used for. Alexander's thinking more about a harbour chain to block the channel. Yeah, there's really only one place to block. I mean, I'm not sure that this makes sense for where they are to drop big chains, given that we're on the river, where they're sitting. There's no way to really block this except for maybe blocking it here. And if we're going to be putting some sort of cantilever bridge or an equivalent there, I'm not sure that's doing. Sorry for misinterpreting your post. Up here, though, yeah, I agree. A quick removal of that building immediately gives it a slightly different flavor. I also like the idea that possibly we've got a couple of... we'll possibly drop here a major flagpole that we can have popped in. If we make it a big one to ensure it stays doesn't get blown over by the wind, it's going to require cabling to hold in place. Okay, yeah, that gives it a bit more flavor for how it appears amongst the rest. And the wall can then go across to it. And a lot of wood is going to be gathering in this area here too. So in some respect, it's going to be guarding important building materials and for the city resources. Okay, cool. So I think they work relatively well for our towers. If you've got any other ideas, do call. Let's see if anything else comes from it. Look suggests, could the northern fort be more ornamental and practical, much of the space taken up by the statue of Manan or Myrmidia? Now, Myrmidia is a toughie. I see no reason that they would include one from Myrmidia, except for, what am I talking about? The fact we're going to have lots of visiting dignitaries. They're going to want to impress them. Now, you see, Myrmidia is a fun one. Myrmidia is known for having what the Empire would often regard to being utterly unacceptable, salacious statues, in that she's often depicted naked. And we all know that our Sigmarites despise such things because they believe that that brings on potential lusts and desires, or however you wish to spin this, and eventually corruption by what they perceive to be the Prince of Pleasure. And the Prince of Pleasure being equated with Myrmidia just makes people from the south guffaw in the same way that it makes Ryans guffaw. The idea that the acts of Raya, the idea that sex in any way is associated with Slaanesh, is to them a completely alien concept. Slaanesh, after all, is the god of excess, not the god of getting your end off. So a controversial statue could be really quite fun, or potentially funny, particularly if the local Sigmarites are constantly doing things to try and cover it up. The fact that she's standing there proud with her spear in one hand, her round shield in another, a little scarf around her waist, her best bare. I mean, even one of the most famous inns in Altdorf, the breasts of Myrmidia, make reference to this. You'll find that mentioned all the way back in 1980s novels, largely again because Myrmidia is often depicted in a different way to the other gods because she's a southern god and they don't have the same sensibilities as the Empire. So yeah, I think potentially having ourselves a relatively large statue that could greet folks and be seen by certain folks as they come in could be cool, but it would be controversial on multiple levels. It's going to be controversial for visiting dignitaries from the rest of the empire. So we have ambassadors coming from Stirland or Ostland or Ostermark. They're going to see that and they're going to go, what is this? Is this some sort of southern city? Why am my eyes being offended so, and so on and so forth? So I quite like it, but we'd need to build a story for why the Duke allowed it to happen. Or perhaps it was commissioned by his father, so the current Duke would never have allowed it to happen, but it's already in place. There's, I think, potentially a good story here, but we'll need to make sure that we build it right. I love the idea. If not here, then this statue needs to go somewhere. Yalv says the flagpole probably works well. Thank you. Alexander says maybe a fancy oversized cannon in the front yard. Oversized cannons are super expensive. I quite like the idea of having one, but I'm purposely not depicting any of the cannons or any of the works that are not largely permanently in place. But if we go for a cannon that's oversized and permanent, then yeah, that would be worth depicting. And having that sitting out of one of the towers is a good idea. And I think we'd want to have it somewhere where that visiting dignitaries can see its impressive strength. So we'd probably be looking at here, some equivalent to what in Edinburgh would be Mons Meg. If you've ever heard of Mons Meg, I recommend going and having a quick check about that. Mons Meg was big cannon fired off the top of the castle 1 o'clock every day, although Mons Meg itself doesn't anymore. It's now just a modern military cannon that fires at 1 o'clock every day in Edinburgh. And perhaps we should duplicate that as well, actually have a practical weapon that's discharged at 1 o'clock with a mighty boom at the first bell every day, or some equivalent little story, so that any visiting dignitaries are constantly reminded of the guns of the Empire. In fact, that's a nice wee story. So I definitely think we should include that. A nice big cannon that is permanently in place, so no wheels, sitting on its own wooden housing with some sort of banner. I need a smaller bush if I'm going to do anything even close to a cannon in this area. With an open head at the front. Yeah, down its neck. I quite like that. So I like that. Really nice big cannon, and it's going to be on the side here where it can be seen by visiting dignitaries as they come in. So I quite like the idea of something like that being there. Okay, Yalab then says the jetty at the collapsing for is probably provisional to make moving building materials easier. They're trying to save the fort from collapsing. I think that's a good idea too. And I think having that built at a later date, the initial building is well worth reinforcing that idea. Yeah, good idea. I love the idea of Statue of Memory somewhere in the city, but would Holzkrugs put that on a very visible fort? Yes, I'm largely of the same opinion. But if we can build a good story for it, I'm well behind it. If, for example, you could have, for example, Lightman's mother be a stallion, and a stallion noble that married into the family, and she wanted it commissioned, and her husband commissioned it on her behalf as the new city was being built. Perhaps she was one of the driving forces behind that, and perhaps she's one of the driving forces behind Lightman's ambition. So that could be something interesting to give him a bit of fire in his blood if you want to go down with some old stereotypes there. There could be something in that. It could give him a slightly darker cast, which could be nice. To give him a slightly more tanned look to his flesh, which I think would be really good. Lightman is he's a really cool character, and I'd like to see a little bit of differentiation. It really works as well for perhaps him being the ambassador for all of Reikland as well, because he'll be more accepted by Southern sensibilities. That could be something we could play on, as Lightman does not have a mother marked in the canon anywhere, so we're free to make one up as we want, and it might be good to bring in some external blood rather than have him marry into another Reiklander bloodline. But that's only an idea. I'm not wedded to that. That's just discussing it out. Martin then suggests, wasn't there mention of a Temple of Meridian in the upper class area with statues draped in cloth? Yes, there was mention. I don't know if we discussed it, the draped in cloth. We probably did. But a Temple of Meridian up there, definitely. It's required. I'm still cagey on the statue elsewhere idea. There was some talk about something Meridian, but not very specific from what I recall. And yes, there was. Yalov says, besides the Pantheon idea, which is basically a large empty building with benches and a warehouse, yeah, totally, for putting different gods in according to our different visiting dignitaries. So it can be set up to accommodate any visiting delegation when necessary. Absolutely. Luke then suggests the Duke constructed a statue in Meridia that was slightly more cloth, trying to appeal to the south whilst not being quite so risky. However, the statue was still lewd for the more conservative. Actually, there could be something in this as a different pitch for how it could go. We could go for more like very recently Sam Manley did a picture of a statue of Myrmidia, which was very Empire warrior-like, dressed in armor. Very much not how Myrmidia is worshipped in the south. So there could be an argument for that, but it would be seen by any visiting dignitary as not Myrmidia. They wouldn't recognize it. They wouldn't go, well, that looks like Myrmidia. They'd go, who the hell is that? Myrmidia, obviously, very strongly based on like Pallas Athena. And yeah, there could be something in that, because it could be seen as insulting, which means they'd want to cover it for completely different reasons. It might be a nice way of inverting the standard trope of unacceptable Myrmidia statue. Local priests of Sigmar get upset. They try to cover it up in comparison to this one, which could be armored statue Myrmidia. Visiting dignitaries get upset. So when the visiting dignitaries come, they cover it up. So it's covered up for the opposite reasons. There could be something in that. The bloke person suggests perhaps it's a rotating statue like the banners downriver. They swap out the statues or some of its features to appeal to dignitaries. I think there might be some of that, but statues are really fucking heavy. They're very, very difficult to move. And because we're dealing with people that are technologically advanced to a degree, but not to a degree that finds moving this stuff easy, I would be loath to do so unless we were building some sort of magical ability to make it work. The elves, for example, would have absolutely no difficulty doing this at all. Indeed, for the elves, it would be a piece of piss. Much of their building work involves using magic to move large chunks of stone. But I would be trepidatious to do this, because if we're looking for something significant and impressive, it will be too heavy to move without doing it potentially over the course of many days, possibly weeks. And that would then lead to where the rest of them stored. Why did they move them? Why do they keep doing this? It would only be done for certain people. What people is it done for? It opens a whole can of worms that would need to be explored before we decided to definitely do that. Yeah, I'll suggest the Stallion Mother would work quite well for Lightman. I think so too. And I'm, as I say, not wedded to the idea, but I quite like it. The Tower of Belem has a statue of a rhino on it, does it? Well, that's pretty freaking cool. That can only be seen by vessels arriving. Maybe the statue is in a position it is not easily seen from town. That might be yeah, in fact, I'm going to go look at Tower of Belem Rhino. Let's go have a quick look at that bad boy and see what it looks like. Oh, I see. It's not much. It's more sticking off the edge. Yeah, I see it. And that'll be that's on one of the back ends of the towers. I see. So that's only going to be seen under certain things. Now, smaller statues of that ilk, I'm quite fine to be added to the description, but they're not things that we're going to be adding as separate locations. The statue of the rhino, which is looking beautifully corroded by the sea there, really like that. Yeah, perhaps something like that, although I think that would be statues that are sitting around the building itself, carved into the bottom, which I also quite like. You've got to remember that the empire is deeply polytheistic, and almost every building of any consequence is going to have some sort of religious iconography laced into it somehow, whether that's carvings or paintings. Something that's often forgotten in building descriptions is how paintings are used, frescoes and similar, and they're just painted straight onto the walls to ensure that the gods bless individual places. So that could be something that works in nicely. Yal then says we have a nice idea. We have a nice tie into the idea that Father's death she bankrolled his expansion of Kalegen. Yeah, I agree with that. I really agree with that. But requested a statue in honor of her. Lightmund is refusing to take it down. I like that too. Lightmund is a furiously stubborn man and furiously strong-minded. And I can see that coming perhaps from his mother. And perhaps his father is much more of the more effete, Reiklander, toffee-nosed, if you want to bring it to the real world, sort of chinless English gentleman who very much wants to appease his wife. So he's very much of the, well, I say hello type of individual, rather than his wife who had actual ambitions and married into one of the strongest bloodlines of Reikland and is very keen on her sons and her daughters doing well. And we could have a lot of the passion of Lightmund coming from his mother, a lot of his ambition and his drive coming from there as well. And him being very much in favor of supporting anything that his mother did. And I'm pretty sure she's probably dead. Pretty sure, because I prefer Lightmund to be free of external influence. I think that makes for a better character in this situation. Because the alternative would be to pitch him against her. And I'm not sure I want that tension. I'd much rather that he had an idealized version of his mother as a memory, and the woman herself was not what Lightmund perceives of him, because no one really understands their parents properly. She was probably a completely different figure to how she has very much turned her into something that means that this city must expand. He must do well for his mother. I think there's definitely something in that. Another idea for defensive towers, how about relief or mosaics on the faces towards the river depicting some historical scenes or something? Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. I agree. And in fact, possibly each of the towers is named after how they've been artistically presented. So each one of these towers has got its own different name that is based off that. And on the failing fort, it's particularly important one. So Lightman desperately wants to save it. And that's where we put our statue of Mermedia. Yes. That's where we put the tower that, yeah, totally. That's working really neatly. Well, Lightman's father would be dead at this point, but I love his mother as a Mona Sforza-esque type figure. Yeah, me too. I definitely think there's something in that. So let's pop up here and replace our central building here with a statue. So Mermedia, how are we best going to present Mermedia? Let's pop her on a blazing sun plinth. So we'll be looking, whoops, that's about as circular as something that isn't circular. But, you know, for a collapsing area, that's possibly not a bad idea. Okay, now blazing suns, for those of you who don't know, they have 12 suns coming out of them. So that's each of the cardinal points with a little something coming out of it, and then 2 further more. So 12. Much like Sigmar having a sacred number of 12 for the 12 tribes that composed it, Mermedia equally has one, and they, depending on which story you go with, are effectively, for want of a better description, her disciples, and I hate to use that term because of the Christian connections to it, But these were the primary figures, the great heroes that follow Myrmidia as she moved across Estalia and Tilia and did all of her conquering. They're primary generals, her primary supporters, the ones she converted from the enemies, and so on. And each one of them represents that. Inevitably, Games Workshop will probably change that at some point. It'll become something else. But that's one of the great joys of Games Workshop background. It changes each time it comes up. So that's one of them would be, for example, if you look at the Tome of Salvation, Fury was mentioned in there as one, as was Namud, the Dark Maiden. An entire monastery to the Dark Maiden is also dropped into that book, the Monastery of the Dark Maiden. I've really screwed up my son. I'm going to get a slightly different version of that, actually. Too busy chatting and not actually paying attention to the shapes I'm making. So I'm going to quickly change that. Yeah, in fact, I might also drop it to the cardinal directions because that gives it actual facing. That means we can have the facing be that way. Yeah, I think I prefer that. So I'll do that instead. Do I want to do more of a curve than that? I don't know. I'll probably do. We'll just keep it really simple. And then yeah. So the Leoricans are the order that follow, for example, Namud, the Order of Fury, are the order that follows Fury, and each one of the 12 spokes, so to speak, has got its own orders attached to it. The Cult of Myrmidia is significantly bigger than the Cult of Sigmar, and indeed pretty much any other cult in the old world. You could argue it is the most important cult in the old world, and you wouldn't be too far wrong. It is the core cult of both Estalia and Tilia. And we're looking for shield, spear, probably spear, a classic stance for Myrmidia. You could have her in our position of, I think we'll go for something a bit more that. So, okay, that's cool. Then we can have it crumbling away the edges. Yeah, okay, that's where we put our statue of Myrmidia. We can build a good story for that afterwards. That combines all of our ideas, right? Before I move on, just quickly check the hands. Comments again. I guess to keep the analogy to Bona clearer, we can make the Mother Tillian, but that all still scans nicely. I think I would rather keep her Estalia. And Estalia is often forgotten in Games Workshop material in general. Almost everything that becomes Mediterranean just gets dropped into Tilia, and Estalia is often comes across as the weirder, uglier sister in terms of how it's presented. Particularly because Tilia got its own army book with the Dogs of War, and Estalia never did. And the only references to it generally pop up either in novels or alternatively in books like the Lustria book, where they had the Lustria campaign. There was references to it. And whilst that's, I agree, nice for our connection, I think I would prefer to go down the Estalian route, just because it presents different versions. We can have this potentially an Estalian swordmaster, a Daestro, providing some interesting extra depth to himself. Perhaps his mother was swordswoman too. Perhaps he himself prides himself in his swordsmanship. Perhaps he's a duelist as well. That adds extra level to the Lightman character that might not have initially been obvious that we could pull in. And that also, from the Empire perspective, works well because there's a strong sense amongst the Empire nobility that one should be martially capable, whether you're a Sigmarite or elsewise, whether you're an Ulrican or whatever. It's very important that the Empire nobles are capable of physically protecting their land. So that would reinforce that too. So he would have a religious imperative and potentially a personal imperative to ensure that he was well trained, and that could provide him as a potential unexpected protagonist or antagonist in a story that you have where he is much more capable than the PCs might expect, and that could be quite fun. John Smith, not having much detail or not, Spaniards and Warhammer always felt like a missed opportunity to me. I agree. Warhammer just they obviously have a very simplified version of of the real world in terms of its old world, in that they've dropped it down to just a few giant realms rather than the great patchwork. But that patchwork has over the course of time been reintroduced, in that it's not Estalia, it's the Estalian kingdoms, and each one of those kingdoms is quite unique in how it presents, in the same way that the Tilian princedoms, each one of those is quite unique. They're not just Italians, so to speak. They're a nice mixture of different ethnicities with lots of different background styles. But in general, I agree completely, John. There is a missed opportunity there that's only brought up. I mean, as I recall, Fell Cargo ran around there for a while. Indeed, in Fell Cargo, if you've ever read that book, they give an Estalia that's almost jungle-esque in its appearance. Large chunks of Estalia, because it's further down, have turned to jungle. And I quite liked that, because it stopped it from being just Warhammer Spain. It was Warhammer that area, with all of the different kingdoms being presented within it. And I thought that was quite an interesting addition. I think it was Dan Abnett, as I recall. Anyway, I think we've definitely got a strong idea of how each of these towers manifest, and each of them have got their own character. Let's have a quick check to see if I want to make any more changes to any of them. I do a little bit. All the towers at the back are a little bit regular, so I'm going to cut in some of this and add a little bit of extra detail to each. Right, so if you've got any more ideas for the towers, now's the time. I'm just about to go color them all in. So if you have anything else you think that they should include, tell me, and we can cover that. I'm quite happy with what we've got. I think we've definitely got something that makes sense and fits very nicely into the version of Kalegen that we are building. I don't feel that these don't make sense. Indeed, I think they make a lot of sense within our version of the place. And we've also added a good bit of history to the Hallskrugs as well, and that we've built up who his mother is. Figuring out what family line she comes from is important. The Hallskrugs, rather importantly, are not royals. They're not close enough to the Electra Countship anymore. I think it's 3 generations ago would have to have been Electra Count to count as a royal bloodline, and the Hallskrugs haven't been the emperors of haven't been they're not. It's not just royals; they're imperial, but they've not been the princes of Altdorf for over 200 years. So they're not royals. So it's a high nobility family. I'll put up an article actually on Wikipedia about the difference between old blood, new blood, and high blood and low blood and all that business, because there's a few details there that I think are probably worth drilling into a little bit, to like the Hochadel families and the Uradale families and similar. Okay, right. So yeah, this is forming up, getting an idea of what this place is like. Let's get our last tower. We've got a big flagpole there. Perhaps have it constructed slightly differently with a small slip moving up. They use this place differently to the other areas. As to how, I have no idea yet. We can worry about that when we do the write-up. Okay, I'm happy with this. Just double check if there's anything extra on here, just in case, before I move off them. We could probably do something fun for the lightning being particularly deadly with a rapier. Yeah, I think so. I think if we do end up building characters, as in their character sheets up there, he would most certainly have been through at least maybe 2-3 levels worth of duelist. And my version of the duelist career will probably have sword schools attached to it, so that you can be trained by a particular one. So if you've been trained by, say, Valancourt of Nuln, you'll have a very different sword style to someone who's been trained by, I don't know, some Daystro master who's come over and taught them like they were in Game of Thrones or something. Yeah, okay, cool. Right, let's color these areas in so that we've got them all done, and then we can move into our other bits down there. So first wall color is yellow. So let's pop that in there. Next is our location color, which is pretty much going to be all purple for all of these, because we've given each of them some pretty strong flavor. Each of these are probably also going to count as a barracks nowadays as well. And I think that's going to be interesting for the general presentation of the place. Possibly we have more than one regiment based here. Possibly we've got regiments and detachments. Given that it's a duchy, as I recall, and the emperor will be keen not to give the Halskrugs too much freedom. So we're probably looking at maybe 2 to 3 regiments spread across all of Halskrug. So if one of them's based here, another one's probably based in one of the other towns in the domain. We should go back to the map and have a check as to where they're all based. Because one of them, at least, we can check which regiment of foot for the Reikland that'll be. Probably about the, I don't know, Halskrugs. It's going to be an early one. You're probably looking at maybe the 9th or 10th regiment of foot for the Reikland. Possibly a regiment of cavalry as well for our second one. Okay, that's not bad for color. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Let's pop in the rest. I need a bigger brush so this goes faster. I'm spending too much time coloring stuff in. This doesn't need to be tidy because it's going to get covered by the location color in a moment. Let's go and get this one too, where we've got our big cannon. So we'll have to figure out where our cannon was commissioned from. The most likely candidates are Schmiedorf in the Duchy of Enwerk in Middenland, or Nuln. Of course, there's other places where you can pick up cannons, including Altdorf, all over the place. But if we're looking for the more famous locations, it'd be either Enwerk or Nuln. And I'm cool with either. We've already sort of discarded Nuln in previous streams and said that Enwerk is more likely because of the ties to Middenland and the intent of securing approval from House Bildhofen over there. And if you don't know House Bildhofen, you really should. They are the rulers currently, if you're playing in the Enemy Within timeline, of Karaberg and Middenland. And they are the direct family line of Magnus the Pious, Magnus of House Bildhofen, and thus are relatively, in fact, no, not just relatively, thus a very influential family in general. After the Enemy Within concludes, that may no longer be the case, depending on how your Enemy Within concludes. If you run with the official version of events, the House Bildhofen is reduced to just rulers of Karaberg. And even then, as princes of Karaberg, there's also a duchy attached to it, which is often given over to the Torbringers. And, well, do I really want to color this in as a building? That seems a bit weird, but I'm going to anyway, because it is a special location. There we go. Let's do our last one. So the Bildhofens are still around right up to the end of the world, but the studio in its official productions for anything Warhammer pretty much forgot about them after the first edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, even though arguably the Bildhofens were one of the most important family lines in the Empire. Instead, they focused on the primary Electrocount lines largely that everybody knows and loves from the Empire Army list that was produced for, what, 4th edition Warhammer, 3rd edition Warhammer? I always forget. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th edition Warhammer. The box set. Where they rejigged the Empire completely. And they're the... I'm going to colour in the statue as well. They're the bloodlines that they focused on. So the Bildhofens were largely forgotten. But to a degree, that's handy because it means that we've got something that we as GMs can play with. And if you fancy not contradicting the official setting, if that's your way of playing, it's very easy to not contradict it because there's so little written about it. Primus von Bildhofen is the primary scion of that family, worth noting. Right, so we've got our colours in. I'll check the comments before I put the lights and shades on. Well, that possibly of note future. We probably want some sort of a Stalin embassy diplomatic mission somewhere. Yes, definitely. When we get up to the richer parts, all of the primary realms of the old world are going to have some form of embassy or representation. And that's also going to include the Empire as well. There's going to be a formal representation from at least half of the primary grand provinces of the Empire. So your Hawklands, your... Well, not Hawkland at the moment. Hawkland's not. It's only a province at the moment. It's part of the city of Talabheim. So Talapine will be represented, Talbot Land, Middenheim will probably have a representation, Middenland, that sort of thing. And exactly how that manifest will need to be covered, but we'll do that when we get to the rich part of town. Yeah, they suggest that came with Lightman's mother and courting servants. Yeah, agreed completely in terms of the stallions. Yeah, they also suggest, I think we've already talked about getting cannons from that Midland one. Yes, Enverk, and yes, we did. And they're almost certainly the cannons that will be sitting on any wolf ships that they make. So there's definitely an established line through to Enverk, which means that we need to have ourselves a connection to the Enverk family, possibly one of the lesser members of that family live locally and are responsible for organizing all of the orders. So that's definitely worth covering. Maybe that massive cannon was a test run for something to be put on the field ship of the line. You know, that might actually be a good idea. Possibly that massive cannon was this one here, the giant ship. Possibly it was originally going to be a bow chaser on that, a truly enormous cannon, and it sunk with the rest of the ship. And they fished it out and they brought it back down there and they've put it up into the tower. In fact, I think that's good because it ties the two locations together, and it means that we can direct people from one location to the next location on whatever particular adventure treasure hunt your players may be working on that week. So, right, with the comments done, I've got them off screen. I will then quickly do our highlights and shades and, pardon me, get this all finished. So, tower, 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 gun, central building, and tower, tower, tower. Oh, this is much, much bigger. Okay. That's that one largely in place. Let's go to our next one. And I think largely the same sort of idea here. I'm not going to be too big or clever about these. That is a lighthouse, so that's going to go right out and possibly tower over the remainder. Let's walkway. There we go. Okay, so what time are we at? We're just past 9 o'clock. I said that I was going to stop relatively early. I'm just checking my messages. I've not received any messages yet. I'm half expecting somebody to call me. But I am going to be tearing off soon. So what I'll do is I really wanted to finish this section by this stream, but it looks like we're not going to finish that section this stream because we got so caught up on the towers and how they're going to manifest. But I think this was time well spent because we've got a very good idea for how these locations are differentiated and how they appear. Big statue of Myrmidia sitting in the middle there on a raised plinth. So as I'm doing this, let me do all the normal things. Number one, thank you so much for everybody who's turned up today. It's always enormously appreciated, all the help that you've provided to create what I hope is going to be a super fascinating location for us to all adventure in. Let me also say, if you haven't done so already, please like, press that thumbs up, or do whatever it is that YouTube likes to do, so we can hopefully spread the word a little bit about our funky little streams. If you've got any Warhammer fans out there who haven't watched what we're doing, or you think might like contributing to what we're doing here, then feel free to tell them. Do spread the word, share it to your funky feeds, and pass on all the cool funky to anyone you think would be interested. So like, share, all that nonsense. As an aside to all this, I'm also, that's meant to be the big one, I'm streaming the entirety of the Enemy Within campaign very soon. I've been building up studio bits for that the last couple of days. I've been varnishing wood for the edge of our games table. That's been fun. And I'm building up more of the games table tomorrow and putting on, of all things, lino onto the top of the table to provide it with the texture that we're looking for. You'll find out more about that when you actually see it. I'm going to be doing a blog post about that over in the Patreon blog. Indeed, if you like what we're doing in general, do check out the Lawhammer Patreon. We've set that up so that we can get some help with putting the studio together. Just bought myself yet another new lens. I discussed one last week, and I've added another one on this week. Another £400 just bit the dust. Yay! The money does disappear fast, but well worth it. So our streams for the entirety of the anime are coming soon, and this map, to a degree, is being built for that. In that I'm just going to put this in place so that I remember it for later. In that the map that we're doing will be used in that campaign. Of that, there's no doubt. One of the differences between how I'm going to be presenting the Enemy Within in comparison to how it is more traditionally presented is I'm going to be focusing on the politics quite a bit. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be all politics and no fighting. In fact, if anything, because it's going to be focusing on the politics quite a bit, there's going to be a whole manner of conflict that you wouldn't see otherwise. And the whole concept of the Empire in Ruins, which the last book kind of focuses on, I'm going to be spending much more time on. And I'm going to be providing conclusions to the stories that were presented inside places like the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set. We'll be explaining what the Emperor was doing down in Uber's Reich and why it occurred the way it did. And we're going to be exploring House Trott and its influence and all that. And of course, we'll be exploring House Halskrug and their impact on all of this, given that they're not exactly the best fans of the Emperor. And let's be honest, the Emperor hasn't been exactly very stable during the course of the Enemy Within campaign. So having that reflected will be fun. But we'll also be discussing the politics of everywhere from Talabikland and Talabheim and Hochland, Ostermark, Ostland, Nordland, plunging into all the civil issues that all of these different locations have. And some of them are deep, ancient, and bitter. And a lot of that's going to be coming out in the stream. And my PCs are going to have a whale of a time attempting to negotiate all of that nonsense. And as I've said on a previous stream, one of my PCs is actually from one of the primary noble houses of the Reikland. And much of the story we'll be telling is going to be modified by that aspect of the story. He's from House Jungfreud, which very recently got ousted from Ubersreich, for those of you who know your lore there. Right, so we've now added a quick highlight and shade for that lot. Now, that really does pull together the front rather nicely. I quite like that. They all have their own character. They all have their own feel. They're all doing different things for the setting. Nah, screw it. I'm going to do a bit more. I'm not going to stop yet. I'm going to do this little section here too. So for all I said I was about to stop, yet screw that. I've got a little bit more to do. So I'm going to dive in on this side, get onto my lines, and at least finish off this section and maybe work into the next section too, because I want to see this largely resolved. So if you've got any ideas for anything that could go in this little chunk of land here, now's the time to drop it in. Because I ain't stopping yet. Yeah, awesome. So we've got ourselves a bit of a square here that is unresolved as to how it should present. If you've got any ideas for what we could put on that, drop them into the comments now. I'm fully aware that some of you will have left because I said I was ending the stream. That is in fact the case as I look over at the numbers. To that I say sorry, and for those of you who thought the stream was going to end and we're packing up, also sorry, but I ain't done yet. I got more I want to put on this. So yeah, if you've got any ideas for how this could go or what we could do with it all, bring it up now. We've got to bear ourselves a bit of a square blockish something that needs to be fixed there. Let me just check. We've got our quick. We've got a few comments here, so let me just go through the comments before I start doing all this. Maybe there's we already did the test run comment. Yalben says, I'll be running a 4E1 shot for some peeps to see if they enjoy it. They like it. We'll probably try to be the game proper for them to involve Kalegen heavily. Nice. Well, good luck with that. I hope your use of Kalegen works well. So we could finish mapping somewhere in the latter half of March. It'd be great. Let's go. Let's see how well we do. Will there be streams between game sessions just discussing politics and the impacts the players had? Actually, probably yes. I'm going to very quickly cover this because I think it is worth covering. We plan to stream every single Friday on the game, and that's going to be the world that the PCs present and everything that the PCs are doing. We're also going to have infrequent, irregular, happening as and when it suits us streams for events that the PCs are getting involved with that don't involve all the PCs. And sometimes they might even be flashbacks. And the reason for that is to help introduce NPCs that you might otherwise never understand or be aware of. But it's also to provide extra depth to those characters. For example, for those of you who played The Enemy Within, you'll know that you start off outside Altdorf, you arrive in Altdorf, then you piss off somewhere else. And when you arrive in Altdorf, it's given short shrift because, well, Altdorf hadn't really been designed at the point when the adventure was first made. And creating an entire city would have been, shall we say, slightly beyond the pale for a beginning scenario, which is largely what that part of this adventure was. But I've got PCs who have got business to do in Altdorf. So we're going to be doing the business that they do in Altdorf individually, separately. And for those of you who've ever watched, say, Avatar Last Airbender, you get the Tales of Ba Sing Se. It'll be kind of like the Tales of Altdorf, with each of the individual characters doing their own things. And it's also going to be an opportunity to see the reasons why the characters are involved in the greater plot, because our PCs are not just random nods who are stumbling into the plot. The PCs are directly involved with the overall plot. Now, I don't mean they're cultists or any of that nonsense. Although one of them is a cultist of Sigmar, and one of them is a cultist from Nald. So they are cultists, but they're not evil cultists. Yeah, we're going to have... I'm losing myself in the cultist thing. But they are tied directly to the plot of the tale, and getting an opportunity to see those, I think, will make a bit of a difference. And there's also some particularly large secrets that I'm going to keep away from the general stream. So some of these streams are going to be Patreon-only streams that sit in the background for those who want to plumb into all those extra details, if such as your want. But that's only for people who want all those things. We're also going to have a bunch of streams just discussing our game and the things that are happening and how exactly our characters are working with that. The politics in particular is something that I find fascinating, the different households and how they work. But it's also something that some of the players find fascinating. Not all, but some of them. And for the players that do, I'll give them an opportunity to talk out everything that they perceive, particularly because it's going to be an unfolding adventure as we go. And it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. Anyway, Martin says, a couple of tower shadows missing the lighthouse fort. God damn it. Although, look at that. That's just embarrassing. Let me just quickly fill those in before I do the rest of the comments. That didn't happen. Nobody can prove it did. God damn it. Okay, there. Never happened. What are you talking about, Martin? Kind of didn't. Then says the space is kind of weird now, not very accessible either from land or from water. Which space? I'm not sure which one you're talking about. Oh, you mean the yes, this space. Got you. Yeah, totally isn't. So what we have here in terms of the space, just to make sure for comments, is we've got a space that is only accessible through this gatehouse, which is handled by the state army, and provides access through to this fort. It's like an extra part, and over the bridge that we've got in place. So nobles that are coming directly in and want to go to the casino can go over and through as well. So possibly this is where the state army takes in most of its stock and trade. So anything that's needed for weapons or anything that's particularly associated with the state army comes in here. So that's potentially something that we can consider. Martin says, it's not over till the screen goes black. Yep, I agree. Alexander, great to see you still here. Alexander, maybe a yard with masts for mounting ships and ships where they put to the water. The yards for all that is largely going to be over on this side. Indeed, I'll probably change some of this because most shipbuilding through the medieval era into the Renaissance, and the Empire is very much deep into Renaissance territory. But most of it was done on not exactly wasteland, but it was as good as. And often it went right down to the water's edge rather than having firm harbory bits. So I think I'm going to rough up this area here a little bit. I was thinking about it the other day because I was thinking about how ships were built that I'd seen, the ones I'd gone to. And even then, there was definitely an area, and the slip as it moves down into that, I think, should be less firm. That area there is big enough to make a pretty freaking big ship, as is that one. So I'm kind of half tempted to leave it as that, but that provides only 2 berths, and it would mean if they were commissioned to build more, in times of need, this would all have to be demolished. They wouldn't have built it in the first place. It makes no sense. So I think all of that area should be roughed up a little bit. Moving down, is there a river salvage operation? Considering the proximity to 2 major trade lanes, there's likely frequent wrecks just through mishap. You know, we haven't built one. Now, the river salvage is normally handled by the river wardens. The river wardens, we haven't even placed somewhere for the river wardens yet. How could I forget that? In fact, maybe that's what should be sitting here. Maybe the river wardens have got access to this fort as well, and they've got a place where they like to go. So you've got the ship swords. The ship swords, which has a concept, I think was introduced in 8th edition, or is it 7th edition Warhammer? It might be 7th edition Warhammer. And the ship swords are Imperial vessels that are manned by the river warden patrols. And many of the larger vessels are proper warships. They're basically small warships with cannons, possibly even 2 decks of cannons on the biggest ones. It's effectively another navy that the Empire runs. Most of the vessels, though, are relatively small, maybe a forecastle, nav castle, often more along the war galley side of things, if you know your Warhammer Man of War. So having somewhere for the river wardens, definitely, and here makes sense. I think that should go there. I love it. Yalab then attempts to write English and fails with Onsen episode once and when episode. Damn it! So as I said previously, we wanted to start before Christmas for doing our stream of the campaign. We didn't because we took an extra player in. Extra players now in. We finished our last recording session almost last week, but we didn't finish the session. So we're going to finish the session tomorrow. The table that we're building for the set that we're going to be playing around is built, but we want to put some extra cool stuff on the top of it. And it rained all week here, and it meant that I could never take the table out and put all the big lino thing that we're putting on and all the rest. So I haven't built up the table, so it's not set up for recording through there yet. So I'm going to be recording maybe tomorrow if it all works. That's not episode 1. Or maybe next Friday if I can't get the freaking thing set up for tomorrow. It will definitely be by next Friday, the latest. And we'll be test recording, and we'll probably pop that test record up for our patrons so they can see what sort of a mess that we have in the background. And if that works, we'll go to episode 1 the week after that, one or the other. If it doesn't, we'll fix it all, record again. And if that works, we'll go to episode 1 the week or the week after that. We're not going to have all of our graphics and credits and cool, funky things in place yet, largely because the person that's dealing with those, Erin, and she's lovely. She's one of the artists that actually worked on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. If you know the image of Klumpenkrug, for example, she did that. She's working on our production behind the scenes, and she's building us a little credits thing just now. I have no idea what it's going to look like. We're largely in the air about that, but that's getting filmed in about a month or so. But we're not going to stop that. We're not going to use that as an excuse not to get streaming. We're going to get streaming the second we're ready to do so. We're really close. And yes, episode, damn it. Alexander says, looking forward to the secret streams. Yes, so am I. I don't want to give anything away, but the first set of secret streams that we have planned take place between episode 1 and 2, as I recall. Or is it 2 and 3? Doesn't really matter. They're the first set. And some of the stuff that's planned for that is going to be relatively mind-blowing. I'm more than looking forward to it. In one of those, what the fuck is going on sort of ways. And you're playing a what now? Yeah. We had a lot of fun building these characters. River Warden's going to be my next suggestion. Thanks, Luke. I can't believe I forgot it. And I'll tell you why I can't believe I forgot it. I created a huge chunk of the material for River Wardens. I was the one responsible for adding all the extra depth, and the ship swords were added on extra on top of the work that I'd done. So I expanded out the ship swords. I can't even say it. I've turned into Sean Connery. The ship swords. The ship swords even further. Yeah, completely forgot them. It's kind of embarrassing. Yeah, it says good connection, docking zone for a local military, River Wardens for quarters. Yeah, I agree. I think it's perfect. In fact, I'm beyond happy with how this has accidentally fallen out. To be clear, Onsen Hot Spring episode is an anime trope. Of course. I can't believe I didn't get which is ridiculous. I thought you were asking for episode 1. I feel really, really foolish. I should have realized that immediately, given that I watch more anime than I can shake a stick at. And will we have ourselves a Hot Spring episode? Yes. And I even know where. I'm just writing the notes so I don't forget it. Oh, I'm laughing. That's going to really work well for about 4 of the characters. They're going to love that. Oh, yeah, brilliant. Yes, Rudy, who is awesome. Yeah, every town needs a Rudy. Luke then says, but would the trade house Rickert be happy with the centralized authority salvaging their ships, particularly if they're engaged in some dodgy tax avoidance? No, they wouldn't. And there's going to be all manner of issues with basically what counts as the equivalent on our rivers of flotsam and jetsam, how exactly it's handled, how exactly the river wardens work with the merchant houses who've lost things, the private contractors that will be hired to try and secure it before wreckers pull everything away. I think there's all manner of fun, exciting things in there. Are river wardens paid by the Duke or by Altdorf? Now, this is interesting because it's not confirmed anywhere. The monolithic force of the ship swords that patrol everywhere and are awesome tend to, on the Warhammer side, be just associated with Altdorf. They run from Altdorf and they do Altdorf things, but it's frankly ridiculous that one central authority could handle the entirety of the empire. It would be like trying to run a single police service for effectively all of Europe from London. It just wouldn't happen. There's going to be all manner of local issues that need to be dealt with in different ways. So I think it's going to be handled in my version somewhat similar to the state army, a similar set of rules in place, a similar set of issues. The road wardens, for example, are part of the state army. The road wardens also have private concerns going on as well. But as it's part of the state army, that means it's handled by the local nobility in each one of the areas. And the empire has what would effectively count as federal. The emperor, pardon me, has federal control over certain rivers in a similar fashion to the FBI sitting over the local police. So there will be your ship swords that are running from Altdorf who have perhaps a more cross-province power, and then ones that run particular lengths of river, others that have others. It's going to be complicated, I think, is the correct answer. In this case, though, they're almost certainly drawing their wage from Holzkrug. Perhaps they run their own salvage operating under. Yes, I think that's very likely, Luke. Very good idea. You have considers we're literally on a ship salvage quest in the D&D game. I mean, brilliant. I do love a good ship salvage. Ship salvage. You then says it makes sense to rewards with similar to roborns. Yes, I agree. It does. And Alexander then says the question is where the money is coming from could create some tensions in the military forces paid by Altdorf, as small as they may be. Agree completely. You got to remember that all of the regiments, all of the state army regiments inside the princedom of Altdorf effectively swear to the emperor. They don't, in truth. The local duke here has 3 regiments that swear to him, but the Altdorf state army is quite separate to the locals. There's going to be all manner of tensions, in short. We'd also explain the salvage cannon is in a fort nearest them. Yes, it would. Ha! I didn't even realize that. I do love a coincidence. Right, okay, we've got a really strong idea of what we need to have here now. So let's quickly put this into place. We need to knock that out. We need to have a berth for ship sword. I can't say the word ship sword anymore. I've been talking for too long. So we need to have, right, how do we want this to appear? So they're probably, right, so if we think of a standard ship sword, we're going to have at least one of those. It's going to be approximately 30 to 40 yards. So it's going to probably, and then you're going to have your smaller vessels coming in there. Okay, that means we need to have break that, break my highlight, and then get that coming in off there. Let's also break the shade. And then get my lines in here. No, I don't want it to be, I want to be able to berth along that, which means it will go like that. And it will have a gate. I didn't need to get rid of that purple. You can overhang on that. I'll need to have an impound and a prison, so we can bring that can be part of the fortifications in there. We need to have that clear. We need to have that clear, which means that if we just pop a quick line in there to remember that area needs to be clear. This area needs to be clear up to about there because ships can go in, which means that we can have a building here. We have a larger building on the opposite side. It's not necessarily just the ship swords at work here. We possibly could even have areas for a bunch of townhouses for families for the... Oh, I quite like the idea of possibly having a widow and widowers a collective area, so those who have lost their families from the river wardens, their families can be looked after. A very communal Sigmarite thing that Varenans also strongly respect and support. So we can have ourselves some sort of communal family, a set of barracky style buildings, and another one over here up against the wall, creaking over the edge slightly. Yeah, okay. So if you've got any other ideas for anything that could go in this area, tell me now, and I will add it too. I'll leave that open at the back. In fact, I'm going to extend it out slightly into the water, so we can have ships coming in at the back too. Have that going right over into the water as well. Is there any connection through the back? Yes, there is. So they can go around without having to take down the bridge. That's good. Yeah, okay. Yeah. This all looks relatively sensible. Before I finish off this area, I'll take a quick check at the comments in case you've got some ideas that I've not considered. And then we can get this area finished off. Get rid of that and consider... Okay, they're going to come in there. Yeah. Cool. Okay, let's see if there's any other comments there. To be honest, that cannon effectively is just a decoration. Yeah, pretty much. Although I think that cannon is fired off every day at 1. So I think it's a working cannon. It's just not particularly useful. We don't necessarily have... the wall here can be lower, for example, than it is elsewhere. It can be raised up slightly. Like that. That'll do. Let's also put the road in over on the other side, since I've not done that yet. Well, it's not really the road, but the road colouring for that section. Yeah, then also says, but it probably could cause it. There's anyone living in Midland. There is no one living on the other side of the river, just to make that 100% clear. Definitely not. The tower between the land and the fort could possibly be used as a prison. Yeah, I definitely think that works well. And yeah, I guess it works well. I think that's exactly what it should be. Yes, there isn't that much space here, so maybe mostly business here, the River Warden colony somewhere else in town. There's actually quite a lot of space in here. We've got a surprising amount that we could get into this space if we wanted to do so. Let me just break off the edge there, make it hang over slightly. Yeah, okay. Let me just go. Let me check if there's anything else there. Alexander then says, this could also be officers' houses for their family. The colony for the widows is moved elsewhere. Yeah, totally. Got to remember that in the state army, and in fact, if we handle the river wardens effectively in the same way as we handle the road wardens, then they would be part of the Imperial Navy officially. They'd just be smaller, for the want for a better word, a smaller department, let's say, of the overall Navy. That means that all of our officers would be nobles, and any officers that we have are going to almost certainly have rather nice appointments. There'll be an officer's part here. They are unlikely to live in this part of town. No, this is going to be, I think, just mostly just going to be offices and bits and pieces, state army extras, some halls. I'm not entirely sure which of these buildings are yet, but they're definitely something. Bloke person says, how do river wardens interrupt the casino? With the crime around it, give them issues? Yeah, the river wardens, much like the road wardens, they're not actually that interested in crime per se. What they're interested in is keeping the peace. And that's a completely different remit. You've got to remember that the modern concept of policing, as we've discussed in some of the previous streams, is a really modern concept. Well, admittedly, like 100 or so years, 150 years. But the idea of a river police force is not what the river wardens are. They're there largely to protect it from and to protect the trade routes from outside external influence. Smugglers, yeah, sure, they're going to stop them, but largely mostly for the bribes that they'll get for not impounding them. The avoidance of tax is much more about the local lord, and the local lord's interested in it. The local river wardens might be saying, yes, we're after the taxation and similar, but if the local lord isn't interested in it, the local river wardens will not be pursuing it. Yeah, so it's going to be very much down to whatever it is that the local river wardens are told to do. So do I think there'll be problems? Yes, and I like conflict. But do I think there have to be problems? No, and we can write around that if we want to do so. Yes, officer, I gathered that from when I read it. And Yalab says, okay, maybe I'm crazy, but roughly how long is that row of townhouses? It's not that long. Each townhouse is quite small. Each one of these is, let me just get my control. Why did I press the right button there? Why didn't it come up? Or maybe it did come up and I'm just not seeing it. There it is. Yeah, so each one of those is around about 5 yards. Yeah, they're really small little houses. That's at frontage, about 8 yards long. Okay, so these are basically tiny cottages, which is very much what I'm thinking for some of the sort of 2-story cottages for smaller families that are there. It's small, as far as I can tell. If I look at my maps there, yep, they're small. Okay, what do we think? Is that enough there? Have we got enough? We probably do. I'll start colouring this in. If anyone's got any extra ideas, bring them up. I'm going to colour this in as a wall. I don't often do that. And why is the colour not showing? I'm going to colour this in as a wall. Oh, I'm in the wrong colour. Oh, I see. I'm not in the wall colour. Wall. There we go. I'm going to colour this in as a wall. We get there in the end to make sure it's nice and clear. Right, next, building colours. So for the river warden aspect, I think we'll just mark one building. Oops. As purple, and we'll leave all the rest of them as brown, and they can just be covered in the general description for that. Building colors, let's mark these in. Okay. Yeah, that seems like it's more than enough for that area. Before I take a look at what everyone's saying, I will quickly put a couple of shades in these parts just so I've got them done. And I'll be further down because of the drop from the pier. Right there. Okay, just get these shades in place, and then I'll go check the comments again. If you've got anything you'd like me to check up before then, drop it in the comment now, and I will get right onto it. I'm still unsure how this bridge manifests. Gets more like that, actually. It's an up and over job. Okay, let's get these central little cottages sorted. Yeah, they're small. And they are largely to boast about, I think, by Hulskrug, who will be saying, yes, of course, we settle our river wardens. We give them everything that they require. Look how enlightened we are. Look at what we do. Aren't we the best? Yada, 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 so on and so forth. Okay. That's our shades done. I'll very quickly do the highlights in these as well before I look at the comments, because then this is pretty easy. We're almost there. And again, much as I said earlier, the highlights and shades in these are meant to be super fast and simple. I'm not too worried about them being perfect and accurate, because these are also super tiny on the overall map. Right, there we go. Sweet. The impression. Yeah, that sort of works. I'm going to change the shade on that slightly as well, on the bridge. I'm not quite happy with that. So I'm going to drop that bit down into shade on that side. And then change the shade on that side so it goes up. There we go. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Cut that in a little bit more on that side. Cool. Let's zoom out on that a little bit. That does look pretty decent. It gives you a strong idea of what the area is like. Let's just double check if there's anything else. Dub says, I think there's enough there, but perhaps we still want more living quarters related to the families and widows somewhere else in the city. Yeah, it's going to require more. We don't have a location there that is clearly for widows or whatever. We can do that up as a nice location elsewhere. Assuming that we don't forget about it and 5 streams down the line go, oh, damn, I wish we'd done that. Maybe even the widow commune could be combined with one for the soldiers and forts. In fact, that's a very good idea. Let's do a combination on that one. Something to boast about over by the fort. So widows and widowers. Love it. And then Yalab then suggests, because it seems like we can fit 8 families, 16 really squish them together. That doesn't seem like enough overall. No, I agree. This place is just for some of the river wardens, and I think it is. I think it's far tighter than it needs to be. Small, but importantly, there you're probably looking at. I agree, 16 families living in this area, probably for their main ship sword. So important ones that sit there. The rest of them live out through the city itself. Okay, cool. So I reckon we've got ourselves a really nice little extra section there. Let's just zoom out. I was a bit laissez-faire with the highlights and the shades, but that really kind of works. I will leave the. I mean, will I? Should I just finish off the central bit? I'm kind of tempted to. What time are we at? We're going up to 10. I would like to have had that finished today, but I really like what we've done. Even though we've not actually added that much to the map today, I think we've added an awful lot to the overall feel of the city. I think we've got a lot of cool extra details added this time. Yeah. Look, I think that's exactly it, and I think that's perfect. The Duke talks a big game about how they house the families, but it's 4 families to a townhouse. In fact, no, I think that's better. So we get ourselves 4 townhouses there, and they're tiny. 4 families to a tiny, so that's 16 families. No, it's 32 families. 4 times 4, 16. Pardon me, 16 families in a super cramped area. So yeah, I like that a lot. I think there's a lot of flavor to it. But I was looking at a building the other day that had a police raid on it. And it was a flat that, to me, was really a 2-person flat, and it had 53 people living in it. Each room had an average of about 6 bunks, and it was just mental. How many people were living in there, utterly happily doing their thing, and that I think is the case here. We're looking at small spaces, bunks, lots of people living in a tight area. Yeah, love it. I think that's really nicely. And Yalab suggests, I like how we've ended up with a really varied riverfront along the river. Yeah, so do I. We've got ourselves something that feels a bit more lived in, feels like it's organically built itself, built out from the stories that we were generating the first one. If you're watching this stream at a later date and you haven't watched the earlier streams where they were built, I do recommend them. We have a few technical difficulties along the way, and I am prone to warbling about random things, as I am prone to doing in this stream too. But there's an awful lot of really quite cool detail that's been built into the entirety of this shoreline, and it's nice to see it come together. Yeah, so do I do that last bit? I may do that last bit. Before I do that last bit, I'm going to do that thing that I did say I do because it's bugging me. I'm going to change this section. In fact, rather than do it this way, I'll just ring it to about there, I think. Yeah, let's get rid of the color there because this actually is bothering me. Get rid of the highlight and get rid of the shade. And I'm just going to rough this up entirely. I'm also going to rough it up entirely with a better brush. That's a bit better because that one was. So this is more loose ground. All a bit of an angle. So we can drop a couple of highlights and shades into this as well. Yeah, I think I prefer this. It just feels more appropriate for the type of shipbuilding that we're doing here. Yep, I much prefer that. I'm going to do a quick bit of highlight and shade in that and be done with that. It's been bugging me for a while. I spotted it about 2 streams back, and it niggled me because it just didn't feel right for what we were building. And how's that? Just keep it really. I'm not going to do too much to this. Go into the highlights. Yeah, that's better. Okay. Well, happily is maybe a bit strong. Yeah. Martin then said maybe the builders were used to ship dimensions and are used to cramped conditions. Sure. I mean, maybe, or maybe they just weren't particularly kind. Honestly, getting into the whole process at this point is a bit of a daunting. Probably we've covered a lot of ground. We have covered a lot of ground, and it's been worth it. Towards March said maybe the townhouses are just converted from the hull of a ship that wasn't launched. That would involve a redraw. I'm not against that. I may do that actually. That's an easy redraw. I quite like it. Maybe they started working a second ship of the line after the first one sunk. The first one wasn't a ship of the line. It was a great ship. It was a really big ship. First one sunk. Unfinished hull sections were left there. Fashioning the townhouses. God damn it. How dare you have a good idea that means that I want to look at this. Yeah, I much prefer that just as a feel. Much prefer that. Doing it. Okay, you and your ideas. God damn, wrong there. Just add a quick bit of color on there so I can see the general shape of it. I'll do this pretty loosely. All right. I'm imagining something relatively clinker built, perhaps. rises out over there. That one isn't needed at all. Color. Where's my colors? There. I'll sort that in a second. Okay, yeah, I can see how this would work. There'd be a variety of chimneys sticking out of it. Tied into place with some chains. Yeah, this is much more cardful. Much for this. Good call. Like this. And whoops. Yeah, I like this quite a lot. This is a lot more character to it in general. Yeah, totally. That works. That works quite nicely. You zoom out there and see what I think now. Yeah. 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 That tells more of a story. Yep, like it. Makes you think of the boathouse from 8th edition rulebook, I think. I have no recollection of that one. I'm trying to think of it. Can't remember that image, so don't feel like I should know that one. It's really annoying. I'm sorry, we moved away from the Sawyers. So much less opportunity to deploy wood handling puns. Only other option is ideas, says Yellow. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so we've changed that. We've got ourselves a bit more of an idea for how this area works. I'm going to quickly add a bit more shade over on this section because it sort of needs it to give that idea. There we go. Yeah, good. Alrighty, let's take a look. Yeah, that sort of worked. I'm not liking the road I'll use for the color there, so I'm going to actually take the road off this section here and color it behind. The idea that this area is far rougher. It just appears a bit too regular for my tastes, so I'm going to change that with a different color in the background. Bring it in close to that, see how that goes. Not very well. What's going on with my color layer there? Oh, my opacity's right there. Bring my opacity up. There's a strong green underneath that already. Which one is causing the color? Have I got a green above it? I'm not sure where I'm getting that strong color from. So I'm just going to ignore it. And go a little bit more brown if I can. I'm on the wrong layer. God damn it. Because like, why is it drawing over the road? It's not meant to do that. It's because I'm on the wrong layer. There we go. Okay, I'll tidy that up later, make it look far better. But that gives me, no, I don't like it still. No, I've got to fix this. I refuse to let it stand. Let me just go in here and make this look right. Lines, size 6, wrong color. Roads, 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 roads. Highlight. Get them out of there. Right. Lines. Okay. Got a feeling that color. There. Water. Take that off there. And then color. Okay, right. We're definitely getting there now. I'm going to tidy that up just a bit more before I give up on this. Not happy with how it looks here. A little bit too rough. Tidy that up. A little bit of color here and there just to pull it all together. And we'll probably call that a day for the moment. Still not happy with it, but that's a little bit better. Okay, right, where was I? Found a link. I'm not sure what you found the link for. I presume that's for the image that you got. Did you post it over in... oh, that one. He's posted it over in Discord. For those of you who are looking over on Discord, the big ship that's formed from a house. I completely forgotten about that. Like 100% forgotten about that one. Yeah, that's pretty freaking cool. Oh yeah, we definitely need to have something like that somewhere. We need to add that somewhere. Let's pop that into the blank area that we've got sitting in the middle still. We need a big ship that looks like that from above because god damn it, that's awesome. Yal then says YouTube chat doesn't show links. I know, it's really annoying, including Andy. Oh, so is it not included? So the links that I posted earlier on, did they not show? Huh. So when I posted links earlier, did they not work? Because if not, I really need to go check into the settings because they're supposed to. Oh, will do. Good to know. Jabs then says, "Damn, there's been a whole stream, and I just realized now I should have been taking notes for the Google Doc along the way. Oops." Yab then says, "I've not even caught up with the last stream for that. Oops." Another weekend, 2 times speed, Andy. I don't tell him. Oh my god, yeah, quite. Is this the ship and you hate it? You hate this house ship. Yeah, of course you do. I totally think we can do that. So my links did show up. Thanks very much, Alexander, for confirming that. So it's just, so my links are working, but others aren't. I'll see if I can fix that later. I am putting that house ship in. It won't look like that, at least our one won't. But some sort of stupid house ship deserves to go in at least one location. This is Warhammer after all, and we always have to have at least one stupid thing. So we can have that sort of up here somewhere. Will that do? I've forgotten what the one looked like, so I'm going to bring that over onto this screen so I can see whether I like the look of it. Oh yeah, it's got an aft castle and a forecastle. It's quite fun. Yeah, that'll do just nicely. And I think doing that would be quite fun. Yeah, we can have one of those on and then turn that into a stupid location for somebody who's done a particular thing at some point. Yeah, love it. Right, so let's take a look. Yeah, that's beginning to form up. Look at that. Loving it. So let's see if there's any other comments before I decide whether I'm going to do any more. Martin says, I've caught up now on 1.5. It's an experience, I imagine it probably is. Yeah, then says, if we get a house ship, I'm deleting the Google Doc. Looks like you're deleting the Google Doc. Yeah, says, I recommend the countdown song on 2x speed. It's a banger. Yeah, totally. A banger. Alrighty. I am going to probably call it a day here because I have now offended Yalib so much with the inclusion of some form of housey boaty thing that he may need time to go off and contemplate his life choices. I'm going to end with a thanks again so much for coming along and watching us to the end. We've gone for 3 hours today. That's a pretty good run. Next week, we will finish off that central area where we put the house ship, and Yalib can make his petitions for deleting that song and get rid of it. Deleting that song, probably I've got the idea of the countdown song running at 2x speed still in my head. Deleting that house ship. Did you ever see the Marienburg land ship, by the way, that Forge World made? You could perhaps make a converted one of those. Anyway, that's beside the point. Next week we'll cover that, and then we'll move out elsewhere. We've got several places we can go. For example, moving up to the Old Garden of War, moving down towards here, or just starting somewhere new like the State Army Barracks. Now that I'm seeing everything move into place, I'm quite liking the idea of organically moving outwards. So maybe moving into this middle class area here, or down towards the slumlands just off the docks at the back of our primary trading area might be good. Or perhaps moving into the small middle class area before we hit the palace. Our palace is going to be much bigger than I first envisaged, I think. So a relatively sizable area. Having said that, though, when we actually paint it might end up being a slightly different size. We'll find out when we actually draw it. So a mighty thanks to everyone that's lasted for so long. You are quite literally the best. I'll bring up any last comments before I say my final goodbyes. And that includes good night from Alexander. Good night, Alexander. Great to see you for the stream. Always a pleasure to have your comments as we're making our way along. Housey, boaty, knifey, spoony. I have no idea what that's a reference to, but that's more likely getting rid of it, one presumes. Martin says, cheers as always for your time, Andy. Much appreciated. Much appreciated for your time in return. Yalib says, Fort, Old Garden, then rest. You think going up to the fort's a good idea? Good to know. Land ship was fantastic. I think it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. But great screen, Andy. Thanks so much to the bloke person for saying so. We will be here next week. Yalib then says, that way we continue on roughly historical order. Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, I quite like that. Going to the old fort really, and doing the Old Garden more really convinces me now. As we then go, yeah, great stream as always. Thanks, Andy. Thank you all so much. We will be here next Thursday, assuming that there are no family disasters. I'm currently going through a minor one in the background, but it didn't stop me from turning up this week. And hopefully by next week, we'll also be seeing, for those of you who are watching the Lawhammer side of things, the first actual streams of us role-playing going up on line as well, which, by the way, I'm kind of terrified about. Really looking forward to it, but also kind of terrified. Other than that, all it's for me to say is goodbye. I look forward to seeing you next time. And do remember to do those likey, clicky, buttony things that you're meant to do on YouTube, because they make us all happy. Thanks very much. I will see you all next time. Goodbye. Oh, I need to press the end broadcast button. It'll never go.